pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. As soon as I touched the doorknob, I heard a muffled voice. It was so faint at first that I thought I might be imagining it. But then it got clearer. It sounded like someone was whispering in a language I couldn't recognize. The voice was low and rough, and the words didn't make sense except for one. My name. I definitely heard my name in the middle of those strange syllables. I pulled my hand away from the knob, startled. My stomach felt cold. My breathing was fast, and I realized my hand was shaking. I wanted to call the police, but I also didn't want to let go of the flashlight or make noise. I stood there, uncertain, while the voice kept whispering. The sound rose and fell, almost like chanting, but it didn't feel religious or comforting. It felt intrusive and personal. Hearing my name mixed in with that unfamiliar language made my skin crawl. I decided to try the doorknob again. My plan was simple. I'd swing the door open fast, shine the flashlight, and confront whoever was out there. Maybe it was just an intruder messing with me. But as soon as I tried to turn the knob, the whispering got louder. It turned into an urgent muttering, too fast for me to catch anything but that repeated mention of my name. It was like the voice was warning me not to open the door. I tried turning the knob fully. It wouldn't budge. That was strange because I never locked my bedroom door from the inside, and there's no one else who could have locked it from the outside. I jiggled it harder, but it was stuck in place. I pressed my shoulder against the door. It felt sealed shut, as if the frame had expanded. Then I felt a strong push from the other side, almost like someone was leaning against it. The whispering rose in volume, and I could tell the person or thing on the other side was right there, inches away. I felt a surge of adrenaline and tried forcing the door again. I slammed my shoulder into the wood. My heart hammered in my chest, and my palms were slick with sweat. But the door wouldn't move. The voice was now a rasping hiss, filling my ears with those bizarre sounds. My name came through louder every few seconds, surrounded by that guttural tone. I panicked. I started shouting for whoever was there to leave me alone. I yelled that I was calling the police. My voice came out shaky, and I don't think it sounded intimidating at all. I grabbed my cell phone from the nightstand. The signal in my house is usually okay, but I noticed the bars were at 0. I tried calling anyway. No success. My throat felt tight, and I was breathing hard. I stepped back from the door, still pointing my flashlight at it, though the door was closed, so the light just hit the painted wood. The whispering became a steady drone, almost overwhelming. I wasn't sure what to do next. My window faces the backyard, which is fenced in. Jumping out of it wouldn't be safe, plus it's a second-story window. My mind was racing with images of what could be outside my bedroom door. An intruder? Some unbalanced stranger? But that voice didn't sound normal. It wasn't like any language I'd heard, and there was a rasp to it, like it came from someone with damaged vocal cords or something else entirely. I waited, hoping the voice would go away. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The whispering shifted volume, sometimes almost silent, sometimes so loud it vibrated in my chest. I tried the door a few more times. Every time I touched the knob, the voice surged, as though it was warning me not to open it. I started to sweat, and a chill spread along my arms. My legs felt shaky. Eventually, I slammed my fist against the door, yelling at whoever or whatever was there. I told it I wasn't afraid, which was a lie. I felt terrified. But the voice stopped responding in words. Instead, I heard a scraping sound like nails against wood, coming from the other side of the door. That noise made my hair stand on end. It was rough, like claws digging into the wood. I backed away again, shining my flashlight at the door. I saw no visible damage on my side, but I could tell something was happening on the other side. I paced around my room, looking for anything that could help me force the door open. I have some basic tools in a closet downstairs, but that didn't help me now. I went back to my phone. I kept trying to get a signal. At one point, the call went through, but the line was full of static, and no one heard me. Then the call dropped. I felt trapped, so I started shouting for help through my bedroom window, hoping maybe a neighbor would hear. But it was late. and our houses are spread out on this block. The air felt heavy and still, and no one answered. I stood there out of breath, shining my flashlight onto the backyard below. I saw only the old fence and some overgrown bushes. No movement, no lights. At some point, the voice calmed down to a low murmur. It repeated my name a few more times. Then it faded completely. I stayed by the door, listening for any sign of footsteps. Nothing. I tried the knob again. Still locked. I had no idea how that was even possible, but it wouldn't turn. The house grew silent except for my labored breathing. I sat on my bed, wiping sweat from my forehead, waiting for the sun to come up. I couldn't sleep. Every few minutes I'd look at the door. Sometimes I thought I heard faint scratches, but maybe it was my imagination. My heart wouldn't settle down. My mind kept going over and over the events of the last hour, trying to make sense of them. But I couldn't. I stayed there, fully alert, until the first light of dawn came through the window. When I noticed the faint gray light, I got up and tried the door again. This time the knob turned easily. The door opened without resistance. I stepped into the hallway, which was still dim. My flashlight beam cut through the semi-darkness, revealing the same old wallpaper, the same floorboards. Nothing seemed out of place, but I felt a shift in the air, like the house was holding its breath. I checked the corridor walls for any signs of scratching or damage. Everything looked normal. I took a few cautious steps. The floor creaked under me, but there was no sign of anyone else. I called out, my voice echoing down the stairs. No answer. I made my way around, checking each room on the upper floor. No open windows, no broken locks, nothing. I started to think I had imagined the whole thing until I opened the door to the guest room across the hall. The door was ajar. I don't spend much time in there. It's basically a storage space with boxes and a table. The walls are plain and the curtains are always drawn. I stepped inside and shone my flashlight on the far wall. My stomach twisted when I saw 4 long, jagged marks on the paint. They looked like claw marks, each about a foot long, spaced as if a large hand or paw had scraped the wall. The paint was peeled back, revealing the plaster beneath. It wasn't just a superficial scratch, it dug in deep. I touched one of the marks with my fingertips. The edges were rough and a bit of plaster crumbled away. I felt my heart pounding all over again. Those scratches were fresh, probably made during the night. I thought about the scraping sound I'd heard. This must have been where it happened. But how? The door was locked from my side all night, so nobody could have accessed this room from the hallway. The windows were closed and locked too. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house. I had no explanation. I stepped away from the wall, feeling uneasy. My stomach churned and I took a deep breath. I walked around the room, checking boxes in the small closet. Everything seemed untouched except for those marks. They were out of place in an otherwise quiet, dusty space. I went back into the hallway and headed downstairs. I checked every window, every door, trying to see if anyone had broken in. Everything was locked just as I'd left it. I felt confused and on edge. My body was stiff from tension. My mind kept replaying the events of the night, that voice whispering in a strange language, the door refusing to open, the mention of my name. I tried turning on the lights in the living room. They worked, which gave me a small sense of normalcy. I checked my phone. It had a full signal now. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That I heard footsteps, then found claw marks and believed something impossible had happened? They would come out here, check around, and probably say it was an animal or that I damaged the wall myself. I felt frustrated and alone. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and washed my face with cold water in the sink. I avoided looking in the mirror because I didn't want to see the scared expression on my own face. My hands were trembling, and I had trouble steadying my breathing. My throat was dry, so I gulped a glass of water. It didn't calm me. My mind wouldn't stop racing. I decided to go back upstairs and examine the guest room in the daylight. I thought maybe there would be footprints or some sign that could explain the claw marks. Going up the stairs, I felt a rush of anxiety. like I was stepping into a place I no longer trusted. The house felt different, like it was hiding something. Every creak of the floor made me jump. When I entered the guest room again, daylight was streaming through a gap in the curtains. The marks on the wall stood out clearly. They looked even more disturbing in the bright light. The edges were ragged, and bits of paint dust littered the floor. I looked around on the hardwood but didn't see any footprints or strange stains. I checked the corners where dust tends to gather. Nothing was disturbed except the wall. I moved the flashlight beam across the ceiling and down the other walls, though it was bright enough to see without it. I guess I just felt safer having the flashlight in my hand. I didn't see any other damage. I pulled the curtains aside and tested the window. It was locked. There were no marks on the window frame or sill. I checked the floorboards under the window. They were intact. I thought about possible explanations. Maybe an animal had gotten in somehow, but how would it lock my bedroom door from the outside? And how would it whisper my name in that sinister way? None of it lined up. I felt queasy. My skin was clammy. I moved to the hallway and double-checked my bedroom door. The lock was a simple twist lock on the inside. It turned easily. There was no sign of tampering. I walked back downstairs, pacing from the living room to the dining area, trying to see if I missed anything. I looked under the stairs behind furniture in the small laundry room. I didn't find anything out of place. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, and I kept expecting to hear that voice again. At one point, I caught myself holding my breath just to listen for any footsteps. But I heard nothing. I decided to test the front door. It was still locked from the inside with the deadbolt and chain. No sign of forced entry there either. The windows in the living room and kitchen were all locked. I opened the back door to get some air. The morning sun was up and the backyard looked normal. The fence was closed and the gate was locked. My neighbor's yard was empty. I couldn't see any reason to believe someone had climbed in. Everything looked quiet and undisturbed. I went back inside. My heart rate had slowed a bit, but I still felt uneasy. The memory of that voice kept flashing in my head. It had sounded so close, so personal. I couldn't forget how it whispered my name, mixed in with that incomprehensible language. I didn't know if it was some elaborate prank or something else entirely. My gut told me it wasn't just a prank. The claw marks were too real. I spent the rest of the morning checking and rechecking the house. I used a small step stool to inspect the attic hatch, which is in the hallway ceiling. It was undisturbed, covered in old cobwebs and dust. I peeked inside the attic briefly, shining my flashlight. Nothing was there but old insulation and some discarded boxes. No footprints, no droppings, no sign of animals or intruders. Eventually, I sat down on the couch in the living room. My nerves were shot. The house was dead silent. I could feel my muscles aching from tension. My mind felt scrambled. I thought about sleeping, but there was no chance of that. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered that voice. I could almost feel the pressure against my bedroom door again. I felt trapped by the memory. I keep asking myself if I should leave the house altogether. But where would I go? This is my home, and I've never had a single incident like this before. I'm trying to convince myself that maybe it was some weird dream or a hallucination, but the claw marks are real. I can't ignore that. Something was in here last night. Something that spoke words I couldn't understand, except for my name. I don't know what's going to happen tonight. I'm not sure if I'll even try to sleep in my bedroom. Part of me wants to stay awake in the living room with all the lights on. Another part of me wants to run outside and never come back. But I can't just abandon my home. I have nowhere else to go right now, and I'm not sure I'd be any safer in a hotel. Whatever this is, it feels personal. For now, I'm just trying to stay alert. I've locked every door and window. I've double-checked each latch and bolt. I moved some furniture so I can have a clear line of sight down the hallway from the living room. I set my phone next to me, fully charged, and I'm waiting, listening to every sound. The day feels long and strange. I keep expecting something else to happen, but so far it's been quiet. I keep glancing at the stairs, picturing those scratches on the wall in the guest room. I don't like going up there anymore. At some point, I'll have to figure out how to fix that damage, but right now I don't want to be near that room. The sight of those claw marks makes me feel sick. It's like seeing proof that last night wasn't some delusion. I might call a friend later, see if I can get someone to stay over. I don't want to explain the full story, but maybe I can just say I'm feeling uneasy. Having another person in the house might help. Though in the back of my mind, I'm worried that this presence, whatever it was, might come back if it wants to. Locks and bolted doors didn't stop it before. I'm telling you all this because I need to get it off my chest. I'm not looking for answers right now. I just want to make sure someone knows what happened in case it happens again. I'm still trying to stay rational. I keep telling myself there has to be a logical explanation, but I can't think of one that fits everything. All I have are the memories of that voice, the locked door, and those deep scratches in the wall. That's all I know. If something else happens tonight, I'm not sure how I'll handle it. I'm scared. My body still feels tense, and my thoughts are all over the place, but there's nothing left to do except wait and see if it returns. Maybe it won't. Maybe I'll never hear that whisper again. But if I do, I'll be ready to do whatever I have to. I won't just stand there frozen. I can't let it corner me in my own home again. For now, that's all I can do. Stay alert and face whatever comes next. I got into antiques because they make me feel closer to something tangible from the past. I don't care about the stories behind them or the supposed value. I just like old things that show real signs of wear and tear. That's why I went to that auction on a random Saturday. I was tired of cheap reproductions at yard sales, and I wanted something genuine. I saw a lot of items that day. A dusty grandfather clock, a chipped porcelain vase, some tattered paintings nobody wanted. Then I spotted the mirror. It was propped against a wall away from the main display. Its frame had a dark, worn finish, and there were cracks along the edges of the glass. It looked heavy, and it had these intricate details carved into the frame, floral patterns or something like that. It wasn't pretty in the usual sense, but it caught my eye, and I remember thinking, that's different. I want it. I raised my paddle and made a quick bid. It didn't cost me much because nobody else seemed interested. People barely even looked at it. After I won, I had to arrange a way to get it home because it was heavier than I expected. The auction house workers helped me carry it to my truck. I brought it back to my house, which is this old place I got a few years ago. It has a big attic with creaky floorboards and not much lighting. I decided the mirror would go up there for now because I didn't have room for it in my living room or bedroom. And truth be told, something about it made me uncomfortable bringing it into my main spaces. It felt like it belonged in a darker corner. I live alone, so moving it upstairs was a chore. I used the side entrance that leads to a set of stairs going straight to the attic. I kept my gloves on because the frame had a weird texture. It felt gritty, almost like it had residue on it. Once I finally positioned it against the attic wall, I stood there, hands on my hips, catching my breath. I flicked on the single overhead bulb. The mirror looked even older under that yellow light. I could see small black spots where the backing on the glass had worn away. If I moved a little, I'd see my reflection with these patches of darkness over my face. It was weird, but I shrugged it off and went back downstairs. For the next few days, I barely thought about it. Work kept me busy and I had no reason to go up to the attic. One evening, though, I needed to store some old suitcases. I climbed up, turned on the light, and walked over to the corner. The mirror was there, same as before. As I passed by, I heard something like a soft whisper. I froze. My first instinct was that there was a draft or maybe a small animal in the walls. The house isn't new, so strange noises happen. But the sound was too close. It was right by my ear. It died as soon as I stopped walking. I looked around, glanced at the mirror. Nothing moved. I dropped the suitcases, took one more look around, and then headed back to the attic entrance. As I reached the stairs, I heard it again. A faint hiss or whisper, but definitely near me. I turned abruptly, but all I saw was the mirror, reflecting me in that dim light. The angle was odd, and my reflection looked twisted. My stomach felt tight, and my heartbeat sped up. I stood there, not moving, trying to figure it out, but nothing else happened, so I left. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the whisper had come from the mirror. It made no sense, but I couldn't ignore how close it had been. I told myself it was just old wood settling or something. Houses make noises. But I caught myself looking at the ceiling whenever I walked by the attic door, half expecting to hear that whisper again. The next time I went up to the attic, it was to grab some photo albums. I forgot about them in a box up there. As soon as I stepped in, I felt a chill. The air was stale, and the overhead bulb was flickering. It does that sometimes, but it got on my nerves right then. I walked toward the far side where I keep the storage boxes. The mirror was along that route. As I passed it, I heard that whisper again. This time, I swear it sounded like my name. It wasn't distinct, more like a shaped breath. But I'm pretty sure I heard it. I swallowed hard and glanced at the glass. My reflection looked normal enough, but I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I wanted to ignore it, so I grabbed the box of albums and hurried back downstairs. On the way down, I felt a prickling on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. When I closed the attic door behind me, I let out a heavy sigh and stood in the hallway for a few seconds, trying to calm down. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt a little dizzy. I kept telling myself it's just an old mirror, but my mind didn't want to believe that anymore. Over the next couple of nights, I started sleeping poorly. I had bad dreams about reflections that didn't match my movements. I'd wake up sweating, not remembering details, just that uneasy feeling of being out of sync with myself. By the time another weekend rolled around, I decided to confront this weird situation. I marched upstairs with a flashlight in hand, even though the overhead bulb worked. It made me feel safer somehow. The attic was quiet. The mirror stood where I left it. I walked over and stood in front of it. I stared at my reflection, studying every detail. My eyes looked tired, with dark circles under them. My hair was messed up. My reflection was obviously me, but I felt like something else was watching from inside the mirror. My pulse raced, and my legs felt stiff. I shifted side to side. The reflection followed me normally. No delay, no weird movements. I leaned in, pressing my face closer to the glass. There were little scratches on the surface. The frame had a dull shine, like old varnish. I gently tapped the glass with my knuckles. It made a hollow sound. That's when I heard a creak on the floor behind me. I spun around. Nothing was there. I gritted my teeth and spun back to the mirror. For a split second, I swear the reflection turned slower than I did, but it happened so fast I couldn't be sure. My breathing got shallow. I felt a trickle of sweat run down my temple. I backed away, fighting the urge to run. Then I turned and walked quickly downstairs. My hands were shaking so much I had to grip the railing. I tried to brush it off, but each time I went up there after that, I heard faint whispers. Sometimes I'd catch a quick flash in the glass, like a shape moving on the other side. It wasn't me, because I stood still. I'd see it in the corner of my eye, and then it'd vanish. My heart would pound, and I'd leave the attic immediately. I started avoiding that part of the house. If I didn't have to go up, I simply didn't. One night I came home late from a friend's place. I was exhausted, but I decided to do a quick check in the attic to see if maybe there was a draft or a crack that was causing these noises. I wasn't thinking straight, and maybe I just wanted to show myself there was nothing to fear. I grabbed a small toolkit and climbed the stairs. My legs felt heavy. Every step creaked louder than usual, or maybe I was just hyper-aware of it. I nudged the attic door open. The overhead bulb was off, so the space was mostly dark. I clicked my flashlight on and swept it around. Boxes, old furniture, the mirror. Everything was in its place. I walked over to the walls, checking for holes or gaps. The air was cold, and I felt a faint breeze against my face, but I couldn't find where it was coming from. I muttered to myself, feeling a little foolish. Then I aimed the flashlight at the mirror. I could see my reflection, but it looked washed out from the bright beam. Something about the shape of my head in the reflection looked off. I lowered the flashlight, squinting, and realized my reflection wasn't lined up with my body. I stepped to the side, and the reflection lagged, like it needed an extra beat to follow me. My knees felt weak. My chest tightened, and I started shaking. I took a step backward, and the reflection finally matched me. But the look on the face in the mirror seemed different. My own face, but the expression wasn't quite right. I could barely breathe. I stood there, mouth dry, sweat beading on my forehead. I wanted to get out of that attic, but I also felt this need to keep watching, like if I turned my back, something would happen. My flashlight began to flicker. I smacked it against my palm, trying to steady the light. In that brief moment of darkness, I heard a definite whisper. It was clearer this time, like someone exhaling right next to my ear. I panicked. I spun around and headed for the door. As I reached it, I felt a small burst of cold air on my neck, almost like a breath. I slammed the attic door shut behind me, sprinted downstairs, and didn't stop until I was in my living room with all the lights on. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and I couldn't focus on anything but that last whisper. It had sounded close and definitely said my name. I crawled onto my couch and sat there for a long time, trying to calm down. Every little creak in the house made me jump. For several days after that, I tried to pretend the attic didn't exist. I went to work, came home, watched TV, and slept in my bedroom. I even kept my bedroom light on some nights because I felt so uneasy. I dreamed about the mirror almost every night. I'd see my reflection looking back at me, but the eyes were different, like they belonged to someone else. I'd wake up sweating and trembling, telling myself it was just a dream, but it all felt too real. Last week I decided I had to face it again. I hate feeling trapped in my own house. I grabbed a big sheet to cover the mirror. I thought maybe if I covered it, the weirdness would stop, or at least I wouldn't have to see my reflection. So I marched upstairs, ignoring the sudden trembling in my legs. The attic was dim. The overhead bulb gave off a weak glow. I walked straight over to the mirror. I thought I heard a faint hiss, but I tried to tune it out. I flung the sheet over the glass and tucked the edges around the frame. Then I stood back, breathing heavily. No reflection. It was just a lump of fabric now. My heartbeat slowed a bit and I sighed with relief. I muttered something like, "Done, that's it," and headed back downstairs. That night was the first time in weeks I slept through most of the night. I only woke up once around 3 a.m. because I thought I heard my name, but it sounded muffled and it faded quickly. I stayed in bed and eventually fell back asleep. The next day I felt a little better. I even managed to watch a movie without looking over my shoulder every few minutes. I started believing that covering the mirror was enough. Then, 2 nights ago, I heard a loud thump coming from the attic. It was around midnight. I shot out of bed, heart pounding. I stood in the hallway listening. Another thump, followed by a scraping sound. It sounded like something heavy shifting across the floor. My stomach churned. I waited a moment, debating whether to go up. The noises stopped, and the silence was just as bad. I picked up a heavy flashlight and crept up the stairs. My breathing was shaky, and my hands trembled. I reached the attic door and quietly opened it. The overhead bulb was off. I scanned the room with my flashlight. The sheet was lying on the floor, crumpled at the base of the mirror. The mirror was tilted, not as I'd left it. It looked like it had been moved forward a foot or so, like someone dragged it. My mouth went dry. I took a few steps in, shining the light around. No one was there. The air smelled musty and cold. I tried to convince myself it just slid on its own somehow, but it seemed impossible on that old wooden floor. The frame had no wheels, and it was too heavy to move by accident. I knelt down and tried to pick up the sheet. I heard a whisper again. It was so close it made me cry out in surprise. I stumbled back, knocking into a stack of boxes. The boxes toppled and I cursed under my breath, but I never took my eyes off the mirror. I pointed the flashlight at the glass and I saw my reflection, but it didn't look right. It was too slow. My reflection blinked a moment after I did. My chest seized with panic. My eyes darted to the attic stairs. I didn't want to look away from the mirror, but I needed to get out. I slid along the wall, trying to keep it in my line of sight. Every time I shifted, the reflection took a fraction of a second longer to move. By the time I got to the door, I was shaking so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. Then I turned and ran down the stairs, shutting the door behind me. I haven't gone back up since. I've been sleeping in short bursts, waking up to every little noise. There's a tightness in my chest whenever I think about that attic. I can't stand the idea of that mirror still being up there, uncovered. The worst part is the way my reflection lagged. It felt like something else was controlling it, like it was deciding when to move. I keep imagining it staring at me from behind the glass, waiting. Sometimes I swear I hear footsteps in the attic. I even thought I heard a low voice calling me by name last night. I don't know what's in that mirror or why it's targeting me. I've never believed in curses or haunted objects, but none of this feels normal. I can't handle it anymore. I'm leaving that mirror in the attic for now. I can't bring myself to smash it or throw it out. Part of me is scared of what might happen if I break it. Another part of me just can't go up there again. I feel trapped, but I'm trying to keep calm. I've been sleeping with the TV on, the volume low, just so there's some noise to drown out the thoughts. Every day I hope I'll gather the courage to go back up there, or maybe call someone to haul it away. But so far I can't do it. All I can say is, if you ever come across an old mirror at some auction or estate sale, think twice. Don't ignore the feeling you get when you look at it. If it makes your skin crawl, trust that instinct. Because I'm stuck now, with something that seems to whisper my name when nobody else is around. It follows me in the reflection, slowly, as if it's testing the boundaries of what it can do. And I can't bring myself to face it again. I'm just trying to get through each night without hearing it call for me. I know I need to do something, but right now, I'm too scared to make a move. I keep waiting for morning, trying not to think about what might happen if my reflection decides it doesn't want to stay behind the glass anymore. I couldn't sleep that night, so I sat on my porch, staring at the rows of trees in my backyard. It was around 2 a.m., and I just wanted some fresh air before trying to sleep again. My mind was calm at first, but then I saw a shape moving behind the tall, thin trunks. It looked like a human figure, but it moved too fast. I felt a spike of adrenaline in my chest, and my heart started thumping hard against my ribs. I decided I needed to take a closer look, even though part of me wanted to lock the door and ignore it. I live in a modest house with a decent yard, surrounded by a sturdy wooden fence on 3 sides and a high brick wall in the back. The porch is slightly raised, so I get a decent view of the yard. I spend a lot of nights there when I'm restless. Usually, I see nothing but a stray cat or a possum nosing around. This time, that shadow was different. It looked upright, like a person walking in a crouched position. I couldn't see its face or any details, just a vague silhouette in the dim moonlight. I got up from my chair, grabbed my flashlight from a table by the door, and took a slow step down the porch stairs. The wood under my feet creaked, and the sound seemed to echo in the stillness of the night. The air felt damp, and my hands were starting to sweat a little against the metal of the flashlight. I shone the beam around, hoping to catch whatever was out there. At first, the flashlight showed me nothing but grass, some scattered sticks, and a few rocks near my old shed. I could hear my own breathing growing faster. I forced myself to take slow steps onto the lawn. I scanned left and right, trying to keep my footfalls quiet. I noticed how the cold air clung to my skin, making the hair on my arms stand up. I tried to keep my grip steady on the flashlight, but I felt a slight tremble in my wrist. Then I heard something snap, a branch or a twig, somewhere near the back fence. The sound made me jump. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I pointed the flashlight beam toward that area and started walking in that direction. My shoes crushed a few fallen leaves, and I tried to keep my steps from making too much noise. I didn't call out or say anything. I didn't want to alert whoever or whatever was there. As I got closer to the row of trees, the air smelled like damp wood and a bit of earth. There was no wind that night, so every small sound came through clearly. I heard another faint snap, like something moving through dead branches. I lifted the flashlight and swept the beam across the trunks. I saw nothing move. The flashlight illuminated the ground in a bright circle, but the area beyond that circle was pure darkness. I could feel tension in my neck and shoulders, and I noticed I was holding my breath. After a few seconds of scanning, I stepped between two of the larger trees and looked around for footprints. The ground there was a mix of patches of grass and dirt. My flashlight fell on a set of footprints. They were shaped like a person's bare feet, with distinct toes and a heel mark. They looked fresh in the moist earth. I knelt down to get a better look, and my knees pressed into the cold, damp ground. Each footprint was about the size of a man's foot, maybe around 10 or 11 inches long. The pattern suggested the figure walked toward the back wall. But there was something odd about how deep they were, as if the person was very heavy or had pressed down with unusual force. I stood up and followed them. Every time I took another step, I felt more tension in my chest. I tried not to overthink it. I tried to keep my thoughts on what was right in front of me, but my mind kept racing. Why would a barefoot man be sneaking around in my yard in the middle of the night? The prints led me closer to the wall. The grass was flatter there, and I almost lost the trail a couple of times. Then I saw another clear imprint right next to the wall, and then nothing. There were no more footprints leading away. It was as if the person climbed the wall or jumped over it in one swift motion. I stood there, shining the flashlight up along the bricks. The top of the wall was at least 8 feet high, maybe more. There was no ladder leaning against it, no tree branch that would give someone a boost. My eyes moved along the edges of the wall, looking for some kind of foothold. The bricks were smooth, not jagged. I couldn't see any sign of assistance. It made me uneasy. My stomach was knotted, and my face felt hot despite the cool air. I wanted to see if there were footprints on the other side, so I moved around, looking for a way to peek over the wall. I have a short stepladder inside my shed, but it felt risky to go all the way there, unlock it, drag it back, and set it up in the dark. Still, I felt driven to know. My thoughts kept jumping between fear and curiosity. Finally, I decided to at least check quickly. I jogged back toward the shed, my flashlight bouncing erratically across the ground. The night was quiet except for my shoes scuffing the grass and my labored breathing. I reached the shed, which sits near the left side of the yard. The door groaned as I... Inside, it smelled like dust and old paint. The stepladder was in the corner. I grabbed it, nearly knocking over a small rake in the process. My pulse was racing, and my mouth felt dry. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone behind me. There was no one, only shadows and the faint outline of the house. I carried the ladder back to the wall, trying to be as quiet as possible. I propped it against the bricks, testing to see if it felt stable. It wobbled a bit, but seemed like it would hold my weight if I was careful. I set the flashlight down on the ground, angled upward so I could see the ladder's steps. Then I climbed up, my legs tense and my hands gripping each step. The ladder squeaked under me. When my head was close to the top, I turned off the flashlight, figuring I might see better in the dark if I let my eyes adjust. I peered over the wall. The other side was a narrow strip of land behind my neighbor's property, full of tall grass and a few random piles of debris. There was no house directly behind that wall, just this unused patch that leads to a wooded area about 100 yards away. The moonlight gave me enough visibility to see that the grass looked undisturbed. I didn't see any footprints. I tried to spot any bent or crushed grass that would suggest a recent jump or landing, but I couldn't see anything like that. My arms started shaking, partly from the tension and partly from trying to keep my balance on the ladder. I decided it was too risky to climb all the way over. If something was out there, I didn't want to meet it alone in the dark. I carefully climbed down and stood in my yard, staring at the wall. The footprints on my side ended abruptly, like someone vanished into thin air. My mind kept looping around that thought. How could a person leap over without a sound, or climb with no footholds? I picked up my flashlight again and swept the area around the wall once more. I checked the grass, the trunks of nearby trees, and the ground for other clues. Nothing showed me how this thing got out. My body felt stiff, and my skin tingled with a mix of fear and confusion. The night was silent again, except for my own movements. I decided I should walk the perimeter of the yard one more time. I wanted to see if there were any other footprints or any sign of forced entry. I followed the fence along the left side, shining the light at the base of each board. The fence looked normal. No panels were loose or broken. Then I traced the flashlight along the back wall again, from the left corner to the right corner. The only footprints I found were those same ones ending abruptly. After that, I walked the right side of the yard, checking near the bushes in the corner of the house. Everything looked undisturbed, except for some fallen leaves. By the time I made it back to the porch, I realized I was breathing heavily as though I'd run a mile. My t-shirt clung to my back from sweat. I stepped onto the porch and sat down on the top step. My flashlight rested on my thigh. I stared at those trees, trying to see if that shape would appear again. I listened for any crunch of leaves or snap of twigs. I heard nothing. I sat there for at least 15 minutes, scanning the yard in silence. My heart rate gradually slowed down, and I noticed my hands were still trembling a bit. I kept picturing those footprints and the way they just stopped at the wall. I felt a strange chill whenever I thought about how quiet it had been, other than those 2 or 3 twigs snapping. A person moving through my yard should have made more noise, especially if they were barefoot. And if it was a barefoot man, why come here? Why walk straight to the wall and vanish? I forced myself to stand up. I went inside and made sure the back door was locked. I even checked the windows. I could feel my pulse in my neck. I walked through each room, flipping on the lights for a moment, then flipping them off again. I stayed away from the front windows, feeling paranoid that someone might be watching. After a few minutes, I ended up back in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, still gripping my flashlight. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't have much to tell them. I didn't see anyone's face, and I had no evidence of a break-in. There was no property damage, except for some trampled grass. I had footprints in the dirt, but that alone didn't seem like enough for an urgent response. My phone was on the kitchen table, but I left it there, unsure of what I'd even say. I filled a glass of water and drank it slowly. My throat was so dry that the water felt almost too cold going down. Then I decided to go back outside, stand on the porch for a moment, and see if anything changed. The night was still dark, and the moon was starting to dip behind a patch of clouds. The air felt cooler than before, and I shivered. I didn't see or hear anything unusual now. The yard looked the same as it always did, except I knew something had been out there. I kept my eyes on that row of trees, and I half expected to see that shadow figure again. Nothing moved. No leaves rustled. After a few more minutes, I turned and went back inside. I locked the door and left the porch light on, something I don't normally do overnight. I checked the living room blinds to make sure they were closed. My chest felt tight, and I noticed my teeth were clenched. I tried to shake off the tension by stretching my arms and rolling my neck, but the feeling of unease wouldn't leave me. I stayed awake until the sky started turning gray, pacing around the house and checking the backyard every so often. The footprints wouldn't leave my mind. They were clearly human, but how could anyone scale that wall with no help? How could they move so quietly, breaking only a few small branches, then disappearing without a sound? I felt confused and on edge, like someone was messing with me. At around 5 a.m., I went out there one last time with my flashlight. The prints were still there, just as clear as before. I followed them again, thinking maybe I missed a partial print or a clue near the fence. Everything was the same as it had been a few hours ago. The wall was solid and high. There was no gap or opening. There was no rope or ladder. It was all intact. I never figured out what it was that I saw. It looked like a man's shape, but it moved in a way that felt unnatural. The footprints were real, but the exit path didn't make any sense. That night changed up my own backyard. I still like to sit on the porch sometimes, but I keep the yard lights on now. I also set up a motion sensor near the back trees. It makes me feel a little safer, even though I'm not sure what good it will do if that thing ever shows up again. I still don't have any solid explanation. I've thought about it a lot, and I have no clear answers. All I know is that I saw a shadow out there, heard branches snapping, and found those footprints that ended at the wall. It made my heart pound in a way I've never felt before. Every time I think about it, I feel that same burst of adrenaline in my chest. The memory is clear. The cold air, the damp ground, the footprints, and that wall standing there, silent and solid. I'm still on edge about it, but life goes on. I just make sure to keep my eyes open whenever I step onto the porch at night. I never wanted to admit I was afraid of my own house, but I can't ignore the heavy footsteps I've been hearing upstairs. Every night, around the same time, there's this slow, steady thump. It sounds like someone is pacing across the floorboards. I've lived in this house for years. It's mine. I know every corner. But the second floor turned into a storage space over time, and I hardly go up there anymore. I try to focus on other things, watch TV, read emails, or clean the kitchen, but I can't help looking toward the stairs. The sound is impossible to ignore. It's been getting louder, and tonight I've decided I need to check it out. I stand at the bottom of the stairs. I'm tired. I haven't slept well for days. My head feels heavy and my eyes are sore. The hallway is quiet except for a faint hum from the refrigerator in the kitchen behind me. I flick on the stairwell light, but it only illuminates a small area. The rest of the stairs stay in shadow. I grip the handrail, noticing the layer of dust that has gathered there. I feel my pulse in my fingertips. I know it's just a bunch of old furniture up there. There's nothing living on the second floor, at least nothing that should be. I start climbing step by step. The wood creaks under my weight. I pause to listen between each step. I can't hear anything at first. Then, as I climb a bit higher, I notice a soft thump. It seems distant, but I can't pinpoint the exact direction. I take another step, and the thump becomes clearer. It's like a slow, purposeful step across the floor. I hold my breath. My heart is racing, and I feel sweat on my forehead. The closer I get to the top, the heavier the sound becomes. It's not constant. It comes in short bursts, like someone stopping for a moment and then moving again. I reach the landing and look down the narrow hallway. There are 2 rooms up here. One is the old guest bedroom, which I haven't used in a long time. The other is an empty room where I stored a few extra boxes. Everything else is just open space filled with random junk covered by sheets. I flick the light switch in the hallway, but the bulb overhead only gives off a weak yellowish glow. The corridor is dim, and the edges of the walls are in shadow. I walk slowly, trying not to make any noise, but the floor under me creaks with every step. My mouth feels dry, and I swallow hard. The footsteps ahead of me stop. I can't hear them now, but my ears are on high alert. I'm so focused on listening that I can hear my own breathing and the steady thump of my heart. I reach the door to the guest bedroom. The knob is cool to the touch. I hesitate before turning it, half expecting something or someone to push back against the door from the other side. Nothing happens. I turn the knob, and the door swings open with a small squeak. My eyes scan the room. It's filled with old furniture, all covered with white sheets. The bed is still there. The side tables, a dresser, and a standing lamp in the corner. Everything looks untouched, but the air feels thick. It smells stale, like old dust and fabric. I step into the room. The overhead light doesn't work, so I click on my flashlight. The beam reveals tiny dust particles floating around, and they swirl in front of me like a shifting cloud. I spot a few cardboard boxes on the floor and a large trunk near the window. The sheets are discolored in places, and the entire room has that forgotten atmosphere, but it's silent. There's no movement. I can't see a single thing that looks out of place. But something feels wrong. I sense it in my stomach. It's a tight feeling, like I'm bracing for a sudden impact. I walk to the bed and lift the corner of the sheet. It's just the old mattress underneath. No signs of disturbance. I check behind the trunk. It's dusty, with a few spider webs in the corner, and there's nothing hiding there. I hear a small noise from behind me, and I spin around, flashlight pointing at the far side of the room. My hand is shaking, and the beam is unsteady. Nothing moves. The furniture stands still. The shadows don't shift. But my ears pick up something that sounds like quick, light scraping. as if nails or something similar slid across the wooden floor. It stops almost as soon as it starts. I hold my breath and try to steady the flashlight. My legs feel tense. I decide to walk toward the corner of the room near the old lamp. My footsteps stir up more dust, and I can feel it clinging to my clothes and face. I don't see any obvious signs of an intruder. The furniture is all in place, and the only movement is my own. Still, I can't ignore the sensation that something else is here. I can't see it, but I feel it. My stomach is in knots, and my palms are wet with sweat. The thought crosses my mind that maybe it's an animal, a raccoon or a large rat, but the footsteps I heard earlier were too heavy for a rodent, and the movement now doesn't sound like any animal I've encountered before. I walk back toward the door, shining the flashlight on the dresser against the wall. The sheet covering it appears slightly pulled to one side, like someone tugged it. I'm not sure if it's been that way for a while, or if it's new. I lift the sheet, and the dresser underneath looks the same as always. A couple of old pictures and random knickknacks on top. Nothing else. I head back into the hallway, shining my flashlight around. The air is cold, and I notice goosebumps on my arms. I can still taste the dust on my tongue. I lean over the railing to look down the stairs. The main floor is dark except for a faint light from the living room lamp I left on. Everything looks normal down there. I focus again on the second floor, stepping carefully, feeling each creak in the floorboards vibrate through my body. I make my way to the other room, the one with extra boxes. The door is slightly ajar. I don't recall leaving it that way, but maybe I forgot. My memory of this place is fuzzy. I don't come up here often. I push the door open and the light from the hallway spills inside. There's a stack of cardboard boxes along one wall, filled with old clothes and kitchen utensils I don't use anymore. In the corner, there's a lamp on the floor, unplugged, and a few chairs stacked up. Everything is covered in the same thin layer of dust, with a few scattered footprints in the dust where I assume I walked months ago. I step inside. The smell here is a mix of old paper and stale air. The window is closed, so there's no breeze. I keep the flashlight in front of me, scanning the floor and walls. My heart's pounding like a drum, and I'm practically waiting for something to jump out from behind a box. I take a few careful steps, lifting my feet so I don't make too much noise. The floor squeaks anyway, and I flinch each time it does. Then I hear a faint rustling. It sounds like fabric shifting. It comes from behind the stack of boxes in the corner. I freeze. I point the flashlight in that direction, but the beam is blocked by the boxes. My body tenses up, and I feel an unpleasant chill move through my arms and neck. I stay silent, listening. My own breath sounds too loud. The rustling stops. I walk closer, taking each step with caution. My arms feel shaky. I slide one of the boxes aside with my foot, and the cardboard scrapes the floor. Behind the boxes is nothing but a few more crates and an old coat stand lying on its side. I shine the flashlight around every inch of the space, expecting to see some creature or a person crouched there, but there's only dust and shadows. I exhale, realizing I was holding my breath again. My head feels light and my body is still alert. I start to think I might be losing my mind. The footsteps were so real. The thumps were so loud. The rustling sounded right next to me. But now there's no sign of anything. I stay there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Then I remember I've got a small door near the back of this room that leads to a crawl space for storage. I never go in there unless I really need to store something large. I walk to that door. It's locked with a simple latch. The latch is in place, but something seems off about it. It feels loose. I test it, and it jiggles more than I remember. I unlatch it and pull the door open, shining my flashlight inside. The crawl space is cramped and filled with a few boxes and old suitcases. The beam from my flashlight can't reach the far end, so I lean forward, carefully placing a hand on the edge to balance myself. The space smells damp and musty. The floor is just plywood, and the walls have exposed beams and insulation. I look for any signs of disturbance, like footprints or displaced boxes. Everything looks normal. I shift a suitcase to the side, and it's heavier than I expected. I hear another small scrape, like something sliding against wood. I whip my head around, but I see nothing. My pulse jumps. I'm breathing fast, and I can feel the sweat on my back. I decide to close the crawl space door. I've seen enough. I latch it again, though it still feels a bit loose. I make a mental note to fix it later, or maybe just nail it shut for good measure. Stepping back into the room, I realize the entire house feels colder than usual. There's a sense of being watched. I can't see anyone or anything, but it feels like I'm not alone. My mind races with possibilities. Could someone have broken in and is hiding in the attic? Could it be an animal that's big enough to make loud thumping noises? My logical side tries to calm me down, but the tension in my chest won't go away. I move back into the hallway, deciding to check the guest room one more time before I go downstairs. As I approach the door, I hear a soft bump. It's coming from inside the guest room. I stop in my tracks. The doorknob is right in front of me, and I see it move slightly. It's a quick, slight jolt, like someone is turning it from inside. I feel a rush of adrenaline, and my hands are almost numb from the sudden surge. I grip the knob and turn it fast, pushing the door open. The sheets on the furniture flutter a bit in the draft, but the room is still empty. I sweep my flashlight across the bed, dresser, trunk, and corners. Nothing is out of place, except the standing lamp is leaning against the wall now. I recall it was upright before, or was it? My memory is hazy. I shut the door behind me, not wanting anything to slip out. I move to the lamp and set it upright. The base scrapes against the floor, making an unpleasant screech. I stand there for a few seconds, staring at the sheets and the quiet shapes in the room. I don't see anything. The silence presses down on me. My heart is still hammering. I swing the flashlight in a final sweep, checking under the bed. It's just dust bunnies and a couple of storage boxes. I open the closet door. There are a few old coats on hangers. I push them aside, shining the light behind them. Nothing. I feel a sudden urge to leave. Every instinct is telling me to get out of this room. The air feels too heavy and my nerves are shot. I walk to the door, open it, and step into the hallway. I don't bother turning off the light. I walk straight to the stairs, practically stumbling over my own feet. I hold the handrail tight and hurry down. The stairs creak loudly under me, but I don't care. I just want to reach the bottom. Once I'm downstairs, I take a deep breath. My chest feels tight and I have a dull ache in my temples. I switch on every light in the living room and kitchen, letting the brightness fill the space. I rub my hands over my face and realize I'm covered in sweat and dust. My throat is dry, so I grab a glass of water from the kitchen sink. It tastes metallic and lukewarm, but it helps calm me. My hands still shake a bit. I stand there, leaning against the counter. I stare at the ceiling, half expecting to hear those footsteps again. But there's nothing. Absolute silence. I look at the clock. It's past midnight. I feel drained and uneasy. My mind is still on high alert, replaying everything I saw and heard. I can't forget the sound of those heavy steps above me, the quick movement in the corners, and the doorknob jiggling on its own. I decide to lock the door at the bottom of the stairs. It's an old door that I haven't used in a while, but it has a sturdy lock. I twist the key, hearing the click that seems extra loud in the quiet house. That won't stop a determined intruder, but it makes me feel a tiny bit safer. I turn off all the lights except the one in the hallway downstairs. I leave it on in case I need to see my way around again. I go to my bedroom on the first floor and shut the door, locking it too. I sit on the edge of the bed. I'm exhausted, but I'm also wide awake. My heart is still pounding, and my head is spinning with questions. I try to slow my breathing. I focus on the sound of the air conditioner's steady hum and the faint ticking of my bedside clock. For a moment, I think I hear another creak upstairs, but I'm not sure if it's my imagination or the house settling. I wipe the sweat from my face and lie down, still wearing my clothes. I stare at the ceiling, every muscle in my body tight. I don't know what I'll do tomorrow. Maybe I'll call someone to check the place. Maybe I'll empty out the second floor entirely and see if there are any hidden animals or structural problems. Or maybe I'll just leave it alone and hope the footsteps stop. My thoughts jump around. I can't pin down a solid plan. I only know I'm too tired to deal with it anymore tonight. My eyes feel heavy, but I can't relax. The memory of that movement in the dark corners lingers. The footsteps felt so close, and yet there was nothing there. I decide I'll stay downstairs for the rest of the night. I don't want to hear those footsteps again. I don't want to see anything else up there. I just want to rest. I keep the small lamp on. The glow is comforting and it makes me feel less alone. I pull the covers over me, boots and all, and wait for sleep to come. If I close my eyes, I can still picture the white sheets covering the furniture, the dust floating in the flashlight's beam, and that moment where I was sure the doorknob moved on its own. My stomach twists when I remember that detail. I stay there, eyes half closed, thinking about how a house can change so much when you stop using part of it. The second floor used to be a normal part of my life. Now it feels like a different world. The footsteps might stop or they might continue. I have no idea, but for now I'm not going back upstairs. I'd rather deal with my exhaustion than face that creeping feeling of something watching me from the shadows. I take a few deep, shaky breaths. I stare at the dim glow of the lamp. The rest of the room is wrapped in darkness. I can still hear my heart beating in my ears, but it's slowing down. My eyelids grow heavier. I listen carefully for any more thumping from above. The silence is unsettling, but I prefer it to those heavy footsteps. Eventually, I drift off into a restless sleep, uncertain about what the morning will bring. I walked into that used furniture fair on a hot Saturday afternoon. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just liked wandering through the stands, checking old lamps or strange chairs. I spotted the Persian rug because of its bold colors. It was folded in half, resting on a metal rack near a stack of boxes. When I asked the vendor about it, he said it was old but in good condition. He mentioned a small stain in the center. He shrugged like it was no big deal. The price was low. I bought it without much thought. I carried it to my car, feeling a sharp twinge in my lower back because it was heavier than I expected. The rug had thick fibers and a tight weave. I remember leaning over the trunk, adjusting the folded edges so it would fit. I smelled a dusty odor mixed with something I couldn't identify, but I ignored it. I thought maybe it was just the scent of old fabric. At home, I unrolled it in the living room. My place isn't very large, so the rug covered most of the floor. Its design had intricate patterns along the borders, mainly deep reds and blues. But the center drew my eye right away. The stain looked like a rough outline of a person. The outline wasn't clear. It had distorted edges, like someone had spilled bleach on the material in a vaguely human shape. It was about 4 feet long, with what could have been a head at the top. The color was a dull brownish gray, not fresh or wet, but noticeable. I felt a little uneasy, but I assumed it was just a weird blotch from years of use. That first night, I left it on the floor and went to bed around midnight. My bedroom is down the hall. I could still see part of the living room from the doorway. I remember looking at the rug before I turned off the light. I had a slight chill in my chest, but I thought it might be the AC vent blowing on me. I shrugged it off. I slept okay, but around 3 in the morning I woke up. I felt cold sweat on my forehead and my sheets were damp. I had this lingering sense of dread, but I couldn't remember any dreams. I heard a soft sound from the living room, almost like fabric shifting against the floor. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. My heart thumped hard in my chest. I thought it might be the air conditioner, or maybe a draft through the window. I told myself to relax. I lay back down, but I couldn't sleep for another hour or so. The next morning, I walked into the living room and stared at the rug. It looked the same as before. The stain was still that odd shape, no bigger or smaller. I stepped on it, testing the texture. It felt normal under my bare feet. The fabric was thick. I didn't see any fresh marks. I figured the noise I'd heard was nothing. I made coffee, ate breakfast, and tried not to think about it. But all day, I felt slightly off. My skin felt clammy even though it was warm outside. I kept looking at the rug from the corner of my eye. Every time I walked by, I thought the outline looked more defined, but when I stared straight at it, it seemed the same. I decided to ignore it and went about my day. I had errands to run and laundry to do. I tried to distract myself. That evening, I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone. My eyes flicked to the rug again and again. At one point, I thought I saw the outline twitch like a faint flicker in the fabric. My stomach lurched. I got up fast, walked to the light switch, and flipped on the overhead light. Under the bright light, the stain didn't move. It just lay there, a faded shape. I felt stupid for spooking myself. I turned the light back off and sat down again. After about 10 minutes, I noticed a subtle shift in the dimness. It was like the edges of the stain quivered. My neck and shoulders tensed up, and I could feel a slight tremor in my hands. I couldn't make sense of it, so I stood up and left the living room. I went to my bedroom and closed the door. My heart was pounding. I tried to calm myself by breathing slowly. That second night was worse. I woke again, around the same time, with a chill running down my spine. My throat was tight, and my jaw felt locked. My mouth was dry. I walked to the living room, flipped on a lamp, and stared at the rug. The outline was there, silent. I didn't see it shift, but I had goosebumps all over my arms. My ears felt hot, and I could hear my own breathing echo in my head. I walked in circles around the rug, trying to see if something changed. It looked the same as before. Eventually, I turned off the lamp and went back to bed, but I barely slept. By the third morning, I decided I needed to do something. I pulled out a tape measure from a drawer. I stretched it across the stain, roughly from what I considered the top of the head to the bottom edge. It measured about 4 feet, as before. The width near the shoulders was about 2 feet. I wrote those numbers down on a scrap of paper. Then I went to work. When I came home, I immediately measured again. The length was about 4 feet and half an inch. The width was slightly over 2 feet. I thought maybe I measured incorrectly the first time. I measured 2 or 3 more times, carefully. The numbers didn't match my morning measurement exactly. I told myself it was user error. I tried to forget about it, but it lingered in my mind. My stomach felt tight the rest of the night. I tried cleaning the rug. I used a sponge with soapy water. I scrubbed the stain in the center. The outline didn't fade. In fact, while I was scrubbing, I felt a faint vibration under my hand, like a distant hum or a current passing through the fibers. I jerked my hand away, heart pounding. My pulse drummed in my ears. I leaned in again, pressed the sponge down, but I didn't feel the vibration anymore. Maybe it was my imagination, or maybe my arm was shaking with anxiety. I'm not sure. That night I slept even worse. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the stain spreading, forming arms, legs, maybe a face. I would pop my eyes open, check the doorway, and listen. Once I heard a scratching noise, like fingernails against wood. I froze. My mind raced with thoughts about vermin in the house, but I also thought about that shape. My chest felt tight. After a minute of silence, I got up and checked the living room. Everything was quiet. The rug lay flat. The stain was dark in the middle of it, like a silent figure on the floor. On the 4th morning, I measured again. Now it was 4 feet 2 inches in length. I felt my scalp prickle. I ran my hand over my hair. My breathing got shallow. I measured the width. It was over 2 feet by maybe 1/4 of an inch more than before. I grabbed the edges of the rug and tried to roll it up. I thought maybe I'd store it in the garage, but the rug felt heavier than when I first brought it in. I had trouble lifting it. My arms shook and I felt sweat gathering on my forehead. It took me more than 10 minutes, but I managed to fold it in half. The stain bent in on itself, which made me queasy, like I was breaking a person's spine. My chest hurt, but I got it rolled. I carried it to the garage, put it in a corner, and came back inside, trying to calm down. That night, I tried to watch a movie in the living room. The floor felt bare and cold without the rug. My mind was restless. I expected to hear strange noises at any moment. I sat there trying to focus on the movie, but I kept pausing it to listen. The house was mostly silent, aside from the humming of the fridge and the soft whir of a ceiling fan. My heart raced every time I thought I heard a shuffle or a click. Eventually, I turned off the TV and went to bed early. I woke around 3 in the morning again, gasping for air. The bedroom felt cold, like someone left a window open, but everything was shut. I heard a faint thump from the garage. My stomach twisted, and I felt a surge of nausea. I forced myself out of bed. I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand and walked to the garage door. My hand trembled when I grabbed the doorknob. I opened it slowly. The garage was dark and still. I aimed the flashlight beam around. The rug was lying there, still rolled. There was no one else in the garage. Nothing appeared out of place. But I felt a slight, uncomfortable heat near the rug as if it were radiating warmth. My skin started to itch. I backed out, closed the door, and locked it. In the morning, I tried to be rational. I decided I would try to sell the rug to someone else or just throw it away. But a part of me felt uneasy at the thought of touching it again. I got dressed, walked out to the garage, and forced myself to unfold it. I placed it on the concrete floor to measure it one more time. As soon as it lay flat, I saw that the outline was bigger. It reached about 4 feet 6 inches. The shape looked more like a person, with the upper corners forming what could be arms. My throat tightened. I bent over with the tape measure and I noticed a dull smell that reminded me of old metal or rotting fabric. I felt goosebumps on my arms. My eyes burned a little. I decided to move fast. I dragged the rug across the garage floor. It felt heavier again. My arms ached. I took it to the back of my car, but I couldn't get it to fit easily in the trunk. I pushed and pulled, feeling sweat trickle down my face. The edges of the rug scraped the side of the trunk, making a rasping sound. My nerves were on edge. Finally, I slammed the trunk shut, breathing hard. I drove to a local thrift store. I tried to act casual as I carried the rug inside. The cashier looked at me but didn't ask questions. I said I wanted to donate it. She nodded and gave me a slip. I left quickly, relieved to be rid of it. That night, I slept better. I woke up only once, around 5 a.m., feeling a slight chill but no real panic. I drank some water and went back to bed. I thought maybe it was over. But 2 days later, I walked into my living room after work, and the rug was there, unrolled in the center of the floor. My heart nearly stopped. I froze at the doorway. I felt my knees go weak. My hands tingled and I felt this rush of heat in my chest that made me gasp. I couldn't understand how it ended up back in my house. I locked all my doors. I had my keys with me. Nobody else had access to my place. I looked at the rug and saw that the figure in the center was bigger again. It was maybe 5 feet long now, with a distinct shape that suggested shoulders, a neck, and a head. I felt bile rise in my throat. I wanted to vomit. My thoughts became jumbled. I walked backward out of the room, keeping my eyes on that outline. My arms were shaking and my tongue felt dry. I grabbed my phone, opened my camera, and tried to record a video from the hallway, zooming in on the rug. It just showed the same shape. I waited several minutes. I saw a slight quiver along the edges of the outline. My heart hammered so hard that I thought I might pass out. I knew I couldn't call the police. I had no explanation. I had no visible intruder. I just had a rug with a shape that wouldn't go away. I decided I'd try to destroy it. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a pair of scissors, and walked back to the living room. My legs felt wobbly, like my muscles were too tense. I crouched down and tried to cut through the fibers. It was tough. I managed to make a small cut on one edge, but the scissors didn't cut smoothly. The fabric seemed too dense. I worked at it for a few minutes, struggling. My breathing got heavier and sweat ran down my forehead. Then I heard a faint rippling sound, almost like a muffled laugh, but it could have been the scissors. I dropped them and stood up, heart racing. I decided I needed to calm down. I grabbed an old blanket from the closet and threw it over the rug so I wouldn't have to see that shape. I sat on the couch, my back against the cushions, and tried to think of a solution. But my mind kept racing. I checked the time on my phone. It was only 9 p.m. I tried to watch TV again, but I kept glancing at the covered rug. At one point, I heard a soft shuffling noise from beneath the blanket. I stared, barely breathing. The blanket shifted a little, like the rug was moving underneath. I felt my chest tighten and I gripped the edge of the couch. I couldn't bring myself to lift the blanket. I just stared at it, heart pounding, until my eyes burned from not blinking. Eventually, I forced myself to my bedroom. I locked the door, even though I knew that wouldn't really help. I slid down to the floor, resting my back against the wall. My body shook. I felt cold sweat soaking the back of my shirt. I tried to steady my breathing by counting. I must have stayed there for hours, too afraid to sleep. Every little sound in the house made me tense up. I don't know what time it was when I finally dozed off. I woke to the sound of something brushing against my bedroom door. It was a soft scraping noise, like fabric sliding across wood. I froze, not even daring to swallow. I kept waiting for a knock or a louder sound, but it never happened. Eventually, I heard the noise move away, and everything went quiet. Now I'm still here, just waiting. I keep thinking that stain is going to finish forming into something. I picture it standing upright, taking a step. I can't stop imagining it. I haven't seen it move with my own eyes, only glimpses and twitches that are easy to doubt. But I feel its presence, especially at night. I measured it again this morning. It's 5 feet 3 inches in length. The arms are more defined and the head is rounder. I can't get rid of it. I've tried. I can't burn it. I can't cut it. I can't toss it. It always finds a way back. I've stopped trying to understand why. I just know it grows a little more each time I check. And I'm scared of what will happen if it reaches full size. I don't want to see what it looks like when it's complete. But I might not have a choice. I feel its weight in the air around me. I feel it when I breathe. That's why I'm telling you this now. I haven't told anyone else. I don't want pity or disbelief. I just need to share it because I'm not sure how long I can stay in this house. I keep thinking I'll walk in one day and the shape will be gone from the rug, standing in front of me instead. I don't know what else to do. I'm stuck here watching it grow, day by day, inch by inch. And every time the night comes, I wonder if this will be the night it steps out of that outline and makes me face it. I try to stay strong, but my hands won't stop shaking. I can't think straight, and I can't ignore it anymore. It's here, and it's waiting. And I'm still here, too scared to leave, too scared to watch. I woke up yesterday with a burning sensation on my left arm. That's when I noticed the strange scratches. They looked like claw marks, red lines across my skin. I didn't remember hitting my arm on anything, and I don't have pets. I stood there in the bathroom, staring at my reflection, trying to figure out how I got hurt. Then I felt a chill that started at the base of my neck and spread across my shoulders. I heard a faint scraping noise coming from downstairs, like metal rubbing against concrete. That's when my heart skipped a beat. I remembered the chain in the basement. I moved into this old house a few months ago. It's got a damp basement that smells like old earth. The floor is rough cement, and the walls have cracks that let in some moisture. The first time I went down there, I saw a heavy chain hanging from a metal hook in the ceiling. It was rusted and had no lock on it, just a thick length of metal links. It didn't seem attached to anything except that hook. I ignored it. It looked useless, just a leftover from whoever lived here before me. I almost took it down, but it felt like it might break the old hook or cause some damage. I left it alone. A few days after moving in, I started hearing odd sounds late at night. At first, I assumed it was the house settling or the wind against the old boards. But one evening, I went down to the basement to check the fuse box, and I could have sworn I saw the chain sway on its own. It wasn't a strong breeze. There's no open window down there. It was more like a slow, deliberate movement, back and forth, like someone had just nudged it. I told myself it was just my imagination or maybe my own footsteps shaking the floor. I left the basement with a knot in my stomach anyway. A few weeks passed. I focused on work. I tried to fix up the living room, hang pictures and patch up some holes in the walls. But every now and then I thought about that chain. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up to a faint noise. I'd listen for a while, and when it stopped, I'd convince myself it was nothing. Then these scratches started showing up on my body. At first it was just a small mark on my back. Then I got one on my calf. They looked like thin lines, almost like fingernail scratches. I kept checking my bed for something sharp, or maybe a protruding spring in the mattress. Nothing. I started to lose sleep. My mind drifted back to the chain, but that made no sense. Why would a chain in the basement have anything to do with these marks? I decided to examine the chain more carefully. One night after dinner, I took a flashlight and a small hammer downstairs. I wanted to see if there was some kind of hidden mechanism or a sharp edge that might explain what was happening. I stood in front of it, shining the flashlight over each link. The rust flaked off in spots, falling onto the floor. Each link was thick, and there were about 20 or so links in total. I tapped them with the hammer, and they clinked loudly, echoing against the basement walls. My nerves were on edge. I felt a tightness in my chest, like I was about to see something I really didn't want to see. But I found nothing unusual, just old metal. I tried to yank the chain off the hook. It didn't budge. The hook was solid. I tested the beam it was attached to. It groaned a bit, but it held. I gave up and let the chain hang there. On my way back upstairs, I heard a soft rattle, like someone flicking the chain with a finger. I froze and shone the flashlight behind me. The chain moved gently. I couldn't see any reason for it. My heart pounded and my mouth went dry. I rushed upstairs, slammed the basement door, and locked it. That night, I slept with the bedroom door shut, feeling a tension in my chest every time I thought of that chain. The next morning, I found fresh scratches on my right shoulder. They weren't deep, but they stung. I looked around my room, checked the window, checked the sheets, checked the closets. I found nothing out of place. There's no attic access in here, and the doors were locked. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down. I told myself I was just stressed. I decided to stay away from the basement for a while. Maybe if I just ignored the chain, everything would go back to normal. Days went by, and I didn't go downstairs at all. I kept hearing occasional noises at night, that scraping or clinking sound. Sometimes it sounded like it was right beneath me. I got this idea in my head that the chain was moving across the floor. I pictured it slithering like a snake, link by link, but I tried to push that image out of my mind. It was too ridiculous, and I was too tired to deal with it. My work was suffering. I showed up to meetings with dark circles under my eyes. I made excuses to leave early, telling people I had a contractor coming by or some house emergency. Then, one night, I woke up to a loud metallic drag. My eyes shot open. I froze in my bed, not even breathing. The noise continued, a slow scrape along the floor, punctuated by the clatter of metal links moving. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would leap out of my chest. I sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. My bedroom door was closed. I reached for my phone, but I didn't even know who to call. The police? What would I say? There's a chain in my basement that's moving on its own? That sounded insane. I mustered the courage to open my bedroom door. The hallway light was off, so I flicked the switch on the wall. The corridor lit up. My breath caught in my throat. The chain was stretched along the floor, extending from the top of the basement stairs to about halfway down the hallway. It wasn't lying flat. It was more like it had been pulled taut toward my room. There was a small trail of rust flakes along the floorboards. My knees felt weak. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. Then, all at once, the chain slid backward a few inches, scraping as it moved. I jumped and nearly lost my balance. The hallway went cold and my skin prickled. My first thought was to grab it and throw it outside. I wanted it gone, but I couldn't make my feet move. I just stared at it. My mind went blank. Then slowly, I forced myself to step forward. I inched toward it with my arms out, like I was trying to calm a wild animal. My hands shook. My breathing was shallow. When I got close enough, I reached down to pick it up. The metal links felt cold and rough. Rust smeared onto my palm. I tried to drag it toward the door, but the chain felt heavier than it should. It was like pulling dead weight. I managed to move it a few feet, then it jerked in my hands, almost like it had a spasm. I dropped it and stumbled backward. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. This wasn't normal. I had a sudden urge to lock it in the basement, but I didn't want to go down there. The idea of standing in that dark, damp space with this thing freaked me out, but I had to do something. I couldn't leave the chain lying in my hallway all night. I sucked in a deep breath, grabbed the chain again, and dragged it back toward the basement door. It resisted, like it was snagging on something, but I didn't see any obstruction. I kept pulling. It made a horrible screech as it scraped against the floor. My ears rang with the noise. Each foot felt like a battle. Finally, I reached the top of the basement stairs. I flung the chain down, watching it tumble and clatter onto the cement below. Then I slammed the door and locked it again. I stayed up the rest of the night, pacing around the living room. My mind raced with possibilities. I considered leaving the house, maybe going to a hotel, but that felt like running away. This was my home now. I thought about throwing the chain out into the yard, but then I imagined it crawling back. That sounded ridiculous, but I couldn't ignore what I'd just seen. I considered calling a friend, but who would believe me? I didn't have proof. I checked my phone. It was 3 a.m. I stood there until the sun started to come up, half expecting to hear more scraping sounds. It stayed quiet. The next day, I went down to the basement again. I did it in broad daylight because I couldn't handle going down there in the dark anymore. My legs felt stiff with fear. I carried a crowbar and a flashlight. When I opened the basement door, the chain was just lying there at the foot of the stairs in a tangled heap. It wasn't moving. I walked down slowly, shining the flashlight around. The basement looked the same as always. Musty walls, a few old shelves, a worn-out washing machine. Then I heard a soft clink. The chain seemed to shift on the floor, like it was adjusting itself. My heart hammered. I gripped the crowbar, my palms sweating. I poked the chain, half expecting it to lash out at me. It just rattled against the floor. I steadied my breathing and tried to think logically. Maybe I should remove it from the house completely. I decided to try getting the chain off the hook, even if it meant damaging the ceiling. But when I looked up, I realized the hook was empty. That made no sense because the chain was on the floor. It must have yanked itself free somehow. The hook was bent like something had pulled down with a lot of force. That disturbed me. I grabbed a pair of work gloves from my tool bench and wrapped the chain around my arm. I pulled it upstairs, one heavy link at a time. Each link scraped against the steps. My muscles ached. I kept going until I reached the front door. I kicked the door open, hauled the chain outside, and let it drop onto the driveway. Rust chips scattered. I took a moment to catch my breath. My chest felt tight and my temples throbbed. I popped the trunk of my car, picked the chain up, and shoved it inside. I slammed the trunk shut. My hands were shaking. I got in my car and drove. I didn't know where I was heading. I wanted to get this thing away from my house. My heart pounded so loud that my ears buzzed. After driving for about 10 minutes, I found a public dumpster behind an old strip mall. I parked, opened the trunk, and tossed the chain into the dumpster. It landed with a heavy thud. I stared at it for a second, expecting it to move. It didn't. Relief flooded my chest, but I still felt a nagging sense of dread. I closed the trunk and drove home, trying to calm myself. That night, I slept better. No scratching, no clinking sounds. My shoulders finally relaxed. In the morning, I checked my body, and there were no new marks. I felt a weight lift from me. I got ready for work, ate breakfast without feeling nauseous, and left the house with a bit of hope. When I came back that evening, I immediately checked the basement. The hook was still bent. The basement was quiet. I breathed a long sigh of relief. I thought maybe it was over. But around midnight, I heard a knocking at my door. It was slow and uneven. like someone trying to get my attention gently. I crept toward the door, my stomach twisting into knots. I peered through the peephole. No one was there. My heart pounded. I waited. The knocking continued. Then it stopped. I opened the door cautiously, flicking on the porch light. Nothing on the porch, no sign of anyone in the yard or on the street. But I spotted something at the bottom of the steps. A single rusted link lying on the sidewalk. My entire body went cold. I looked around expecting to see someone, but the street was empty. The link didn't move, but it felt like it was watching me somehow. I backed away and shut the door. My mind spun. I felt that same tightness in my chest I'd had the first time I saw the chain move. I thought throwing it away would solve everything, but apparently I was wrong. Now I can't stop thinking about that one link on my porch. I haven't gone outside to grab it. I'm sitting here in the hallway typing this on my phone, listening for any sign of movement. My arms and legs feel tense. My skin keeps prickling. I catch myself glancing at the basement door again and again, even though I know the chain isn't there anymore, or at least, not all of it. I'm trying to keep myself calm, but every little sound makes me jump. I don't know what's going to happen next. For now, I'm staying awake, watching and listening. If I hear that scraping noise again, I'm not sure I'll be brave enough to open the door. I feel like it's only a matter of time before that chain or some part of it finds a way back inside. And if it does, I don't know how I'm going to stop it. I don't want to leave my house, but I also don't want to see what else that thing can do. I'm stuck, and I'm terrified. All I can do is hope it leaves me alone. But the more I think about it, the more I feel like that chain isn't done with me yet. I never expected a single window to upend my life. When I first moved into this house, I loved the idea of a huge window in my living room. It brought in bright sunlight during the day. I could see the entire street outside, and the neighbors could look in if they passed by. But it felt open. It felt welcoming. Now that same window feels like a threat. I remember the first day I noticed something odd about it. I was heading to bed, so I walked over to close the curtains. I usually lock the window by flipping a small latch on the bottom. It's quick and simple. That night, though, after I locked it, I woke up around 3 in the morning to a loud banging noise. I sat up, heart pounding, and realized it was coming from the living room. The noise was like a strong wind whipping an unsecured window, but there hadn't been any wind in the weather forecast. I walked out to see what was going on. The curtains were swinging a bit and the window itself was open, smacking against the frame. I flipped the light switch. I could see nothing outside but darkness. No leaves were moving, and the branches of the tree in my front yard were still. I moved closer and checked the latch. It was turned to the locked position, but the window was definitely open. I frowned, closed it all the way, pushed the latch in, and made sure it caught. Then I pulled on it a couple of times. It didn't budge. Satisfied, I went back to my room, more annoyed than scared. I figured maybe I hadn't locked it fully before. The next night, I went through the same routine. I checked the weather, saw no real wind or storm coming, and locked the window before bed. I gave it a tug for good measure. It stayed put. Sometime later, I was in a deep sleep when I heard the same banging. A dull, repetitive thud. My eyes shot open, my stomach tightened, and I felt a tingling in my limbs. I grabbed my phone to see the time, around 2:30 in the morning. I crept out to the living room. Again, the window was open and the curtains were swaying. The night outside looked calm. No strong breeze, yet the window hammered against the frame. I flipped on the lamp, cursing under my breath, and closed it. I tested the latch once more. This time, I examined every corner of it. There was no crack or damage I could see. I yanked on it with more force than before. It stayed closed. I shook my head and walked back to my room. I told myself it had to be something mechanical. Maybe the latch was old or loose. It was an older house, after all. During the daytime, I tried to investigate. I looked for any gaps or reasons the latch might slip. The metal parts looked worn but functional. I tightened the screws. I sprayed a bit of lubricant to make sure nothing was stuck. Then I locked and unlocked it repeatedly, each time pulling on the window. It didn't move. Everything seemed fine. So I waited. That night, I closed the window as usual. Then I pulled a small chair over and sat in the dark, facing the window, determined to see if it moved on its own. An hour passed. I got bored. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. My back started to ache from sitting still. I got up to stretch and heard nothing unusual. I felt a creeping sense of unease, but I tried to push it away. Eventually, I decided to go to bed. Nothing had happened while I was there, so I figured the latch was fixed now. It wasn't fixed. Around 3 in the morning, that banging noise jerked me awake. I felt a chill spread through my arms. My heart rate shot up. I muttered to myself, "What the hell?" and went to the living room. Sure enough, the window was wide open, slamming against the frame. I could hear the glass rattling each time it hit. I flicked on the overhead light. The room looked the same as always, except for the moving curtains. I walked over, bracing myself for a cold breeze, but the air felt still. No draft touched my skin. That made no sense to me. If the window was banging like that, there had to be wind. My hands trembled a bit as I grabbed the window's edge. My palm felt the smooth glass. I shut it firmly. Then I heard a small scraping sound from behind me. I spun around, but there was only the couch, the coffee table, and the TV stand. My eyes darted around the space, searching for any movement. Nothing. Stillness. I stood there for a few minutes, breathing fast, waiting. The house felt too quiet. I decided to stay in the living room for the rest of the night. I turned on the TV at low volume. Maybe I could keep an eye on the window. But nothing else happened until sunrise. When the morning light filled the room, I felt less anxious. I checked the latch again. It was still locked. That's when I realized something else. The latch was locked, but the window was obviously open before. That's not normal. That's not just a worn-out mechanism. I felt a lump in my throat. I tried to ignore any supernatural explanation. I told myself I was tired and missing something obvious. Maybe the latch was slipping back into the locked position after the window came open. I'm not a handyman, so I wasn't sure if that was possible. The next few nights were the same. Every time I locked the window before bed, it somehow opened in the early hours. Each time the banging woke me. Each time I'd find the latch in the locked position when I went to close it. My frustration grew, along with a prickling fear I didn't want to admit. I called a local handyman to come check it out. He arrived in the afternoon, fiddled with the window, tested the latch, replaced a small piece of hardware, and told me it should be fine. He didn't see any other issues. I felt relieved for a moment because maybe that would be enough. But it wasn't. The same night, the banging started around 2 in the morning again. By now, I was more alert when I woke up. My chest felt tight, and beads of sweat rolled down my forehead. I marched straight to the living room and grabbed the window. As I shut it, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection. It was a shadowy form standing behind me. I froze. My skin broke into goosebumps. My scalp felt cold. I felt my chest clench and my breathing speed up. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out any other sound. For a second, I didn't even move. I stared at that reflection, trying to make out details. It was dark, shapeless, a kind of tall, featureless figure. I spun around so fast I almost lost my balance, but when I looked behind me, there was nothing. Just the room. My body trembled, and a wave of nausea filled my stomach. I muttered, "This can't be real." But I knew what I saw, or at least thought I saw. I slept with the lights on that night. I couldn't relax. Every little creak of the house made me jump. My mind raced with questions. Did I actually see something? Could it have been a reflection of my own shadow somehow? Maybe a trick of the light? But it looked distinct. It looked separate from me, and it was definitely behind me. I thought about calling a friend or a neighbor, but it was late, and I felt embarrassed. I tried to calm myself by lying in bed, listening to some soft music on my phone. I eventually drifted off, though I didn't sleep well. The next day, I woke up tired and stressed. I considered boarding up the window just to keep it shut, but that sounded excessive. Instead, I went to the hardware store and picked out the heaviest duty lock I could find. I also grabbed new weather stripping, thinking maybe a better seal would help. I spent an hour installing everything. Then I tested it again and again. No movement. It seemed secure. As a final measure, I taped the edges with duct tape, just to be sure. It wasn't pretty, but I didn't care about that. I wanted peace at night. That evening, I made dinner and tried to distract myself with TV. The living room felt tense, though. Every time I glanced at the window, I remembered that figure in the glass. My shoulders felt stiff. My stomach felt uneasy. I told myself it was just an overactive imagination. Sometimes the mind can play tricks. Maybe I was half asleep. Maybe the reflection of the lamp or the TV made me think I saw a shadow, but I couldn't fully convince myself. At around midnight, I went to bed. I managed to doze off by about 1. Just after 2, I woke up with my ears ringing. My heartbeat pulsed in my head. For a moment, I thought I heard a faint tapping. I sat up and listened. The house was silent. I flicked on the lamp by my bedside. The tapping stopped. My mouth felt dry and I forced myself to breathe slowly. I waited a couple of minutes, nothing. I almost wondered if I had dreamed it. Then I heard a single loud thud. It sounded like it came from the living room. I felt a burst of adrenaline, like my body went into fight or flight mode. My hands were clammy and my legs felt shaky. I slid out of bed, grabbed a flashlight. I'm not sure why I bothered, since the living room lights worked fine, and crept down the hallway. I peeked around the corner. The curtains were still in place, but they shifted a bit as if there was a breeze. My heart pounded. I switched on the living room light. The window was partially open, and the duct tape on one side dangled loose. I almost dropped the flashlight. I walked over and slammed the window shut. I tried to push it to see if it was just forced open. It felt firm now. No sign of damage, no splintered wood, nothing. That's when I saw it again. In the reflection, that dark shape stood just behind me. My pulse skyrocketed. I spun around quickly, aiming my flashlight at the space behind me. The beam cut through the air, revealing empty space. My couch, my table, my chairs, everything looked normal. I didn't know what to do. I took a few steps back from the window, breathing heavily. My mind raced. I felt a tingling in my fingers, and my forehead broke out in sweat. My entire body was on alert, like I was about to face some threat I couldn't see. I forced myself to check every corner of the living room. I looked under the couch, behind the curtains, even inside a small closet in the hallway. Nothing. There was no one in the house but me. For the rest of that night, I sat on the couch with all the lights on, staring at the window. I started to notice the smallest sounds, a crack in the floorboards, a distant hum from outside, the ticking of the clock on my wall. My eyelids were heavy, but my brain refused to shut off. Around 5 in the morning, I started to nod off. That's when I heard a faint rustling again. I jolted awake, heart pounding. The window was still shut, but the curtains trembled slightly. I moved closer. The latch was locked. The tape was torn on the one side, but the window wasn't opening at that moment. I put my ear to the glass, half expecting to hear a whisper. I heard only my own ragged breathing. Days passed like this. Every time I closed the window and tried to secure it, it would open at night. The banging varied in intensity. Sometimes it was soft, like a gentle knock. Other times it was violent, as if someone was yanking it back and forth. Each time, I checked for any logical explanation. Could it be a breeze caused by pressure changes? Could it be a fault in the structure of the house? Yet there was no consistent wind or draft. And that shape in the reflection, I saw it at least 3 more times. Each time, I felt my stomach twist. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Each time it vanished if I turned around fast enough. I began spending as little time in the living room as possible. I watched TV in my bedroom. I read in the kitchen or dining area. I stopped leaving the curtains wide open during the day because the sight of that window gave me an uneasy feeling. A few nights, I slept in a motel just to get some rest. But I didn't want to abandon my house. It was my place, and it felt wrong to run away. Eventually, I asked a friend to come over during the evening. I didn't want to scare him, so I just said I was having trouble with a stubborn window. He's more knowledgeable about home repairs than I am. We sat in the living room and I explained the latch problem. I didn't mention the figure. We tested the window several times. He suggested we add a secondary lock, a stronger one, maybe a sliding bolt up top. We installed it together. He joked that my house was trying to breathe or something. I forced a laugh, but my palms were sweating the whole time. After he left, I stayed in that living room, waiting. I turned off the lights and watched the window. Midnight came and went. I felt a ripple of hope that maybe the new lock would hold. But by 2 in the morning, I heard the banging again. It was louder this time, more urgent. My heart leapt into my throat. I reached for the lamp switch and turned it on. The window was open, both locks undone. The new sliding bolt was pulled back. I stared in disbelief. My muscles tensed. My breathing turned shallow. Then I looked at the reflection and saw that shape behind me once more, closer this time, like it was leaning over my shoulder. I gasped, spun around and saw nothing. The living room was empty, but I felt like something was right there, just out of sight. I slammed the window shut. My hands shook so violently I could barely grip the lock. I locked the bolt again, double-checked it, and stepped back. I felt lightheaded. The banging had stopped, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something stood behind me, watching. My heart hammered as I retreated to my bedroom, turned on every light, and shut the door behind me. I pushed a chair against the doorknob. I paced around the room trying to steady my breathing, feeling a tingling fear in every part of my body. My skin felt clammy. My stomach churned. I was wide awake, but exhausted. I kept telling myself to stay calm, but I couldn't help imagining that dark form lurking by the window, waiting. That's where I am now, telling this story. I haven't solved the problem. The window still opens on its own. It still bangs at night. I still see that shape in the reflection if I look at just the right angle. It's driving me to the edge of my nerves. I've tried everything I know. I've checked with neighbors, and nobody else has had anything like this happen. I've inspected the locks 100 times. Nothing helps. I feel stuck. I don't want to leave my house, but every night I'm on edge, listening for that first thud. My arms tense up. My heart feels like it's pumping too fast, and my ears ring with every small sound. I keep hoping I'll find a simple explanation, but I can't ignore what I've seen. It's not normal, and I can't make it go away. That large window I once loved is now something I dread. Every night I brace myself for the banging. Every night I catch glimpses of that dark shape behind me in the glass. I lock the window again and again, but it doesn't matter. It opens on its own. It keeps happening. And I'm stuck here, watching, waiting, afraid to turn my back on it for too long. That's my story, and it's still going on. I've tried not to think about what it all means. All I know is that it's real, and I can't make it stop. I used to think nighttime drives were peaceful. I liked the quiet roads and the dark sky. Now I avoid driving after sunset, because every time I check my rearview mirror, I see something I can't explain. It started with a faint shape behind me, and it got worse. I don't see when I turn around. I don't hear any voice, but I feel that thing watching me, and I hate it. My name is Mark, and I drive a lot for work. I'm a sales rep for an industrial supply company. I cover multiple states, so I spend most of my week on highways and back roads. I drive a reliable car with good mileage, and until a few months ago, I enjoyed the freedom. I'd push through the night, listening to the radio or sipping on coffee. I liked the open road. I never worried about weird stuff until that first night I saw the silhouette. I was on a stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. The clock on my dash read 10:47 p.m. I remember that clearly because I glanced at it right before I noticed the shape. My overhead light was off, and the only illumination came from the dashboard and the occasional headlight of an oncoming vehicle. I was a bit tired, but not exhausted. I had the radio turned low. I was thinking about my next day's schedule when my eyes drifted to the rearview mirror. Something moved in the back seat. At first, I thought I was seeing a reflection of a passing car. I blinked a few times and looked again. I saw a dark outline, like a person's shoulders and head. It was faint, but it looked like someone was sitting in the middle seat. I got an instant rush of chills. The hair on my arms stood up. My stomach felt tight. I turned around to see if maybe someone had snuck in at the last rest stop, which made no sense at all. Nobody was there. I looked back at the mirror. The shape was gone. I kept driving, telling myself it was a trick of the light. I turned the radio louder and forced myself to focus on the road. Every time I glanced at the mirror, I felt tense. I kept expecting the shape to show up. Nothing else happened that night, though. I got home around 2 a.m., parked, and tried to forget about it. But I couldn't. It stayed with me in the back of my mind. 2 days later, I drove to another town for a meeting. I ended up finishing late and got stuck in traffic heading home. By the time I was on the open road, it was after 9 p.m. My thoughts returned to that odd sighting. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was overtired, that my eyes were playing games. But about an hour into the drive, I noticed a familiar shape in the mirror. This time it was clearer. It looked like a person leaning forward between the front seats. I felt a wave of panic. I clutched the steering wheel and stared straight ahead. My heart pounded. My breathing got shallow. I told myself to look back. I gripped the wheel harder, then turned my head. Nothing was there. I swung my gaze back to the mirror. Still empty. I exhaled, feeling a bit foolish. I relaxed my shoulders and tried to laugh it off. That's when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the mirror again. I jerked my head and saw nothing. This continued the rest of the drive. I'd see a flicker of movement whenever I wasn't looking directly at the mirror. I got home feeling anxious and shaky. I went to bed immediately, but I couldn't sleep well. The next day I felt jumpy. I told a friend that I was seeing weird reflections on my drives. He joked that it was probably my mind playing tricks on me. I tried to believe that, but the sightings continued. Over the next few weeks, it became more frequent. Whenever I drove at night, I sensed something behind me. Sometimes I'd look at the mirror and see a faint shape. Sometimes it looked closer, like it was leaning forward between the seats. Other times I'd see nothing, but I felt a heavy presence. I never heard any voice, but I felt like it wanted to speak. One night I stopped at a gas station around 11 p.m. The place was nearly empty. After filling up, I climbed back in the car and sat there for a minute, looking at the back seat. It was empty. The upholstery was clean. No objects were lying around. I told myself I was going to drive home calmly, no fear. But as soon as I started the engine and pulled onto the road, I got that feeling again. It was like someone had quietly taken a seat behind me. My scalp tingled. My skin felt cold. My breathing sped up. I kept glancing at the mirror. I saw the silhouette pop in and out of my vision. At one point, it seemed to be right in the center, like it was peering between the headrests. I panicked and almost swerved. I forced myself to straighten the wheel. I turned the radio off, hoping for silence, but that made it worse. Every small noise in the car made me jump. The hum of the engine felt louder. My own breath sounded harsh. I tried to talk to myself out loud, saying, "Calm down. There's nothing, just keep driving." My voice shook. That night, about halfway home, the thing did something new. I sensed movement next to my shoulder, like someone leaning forward. I didn't see anything in my peripheral vision, but I felt a shift in the air. It was like a soft brush near my left side. I yelped and jerked the steering wheel. I almost drove off the road. I managed to correct it in time. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my neck. A few seconds later, I smelled something. It was like old leather or damp fabric. It was faint, but it made me gag. I didn't know what to do, so I sped up. I just wanted to get home. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I jumped out of the car and slammed the door. My body was shaking. I stood there in the dark, staring at the back seat through the window. Nothing moved. It was empty and silent. I walked to my front door, locked it behind me, and spent the night awake on my couch. I couldn't settle down. My palms were clammy, and my eyes kept darting around the living room. I wondered if I needed to see a doctor. I wondered if I was having some kind of stress-related hallucination. But then the next day I felt fine. I did my work, talked to clients, and tried to push the thoughts aside. Until the evening came. Then I felt dread. I knew I had another trip scheduled for later in the week. I tried to plan it so I'd arrive home before sunset. But meetings dragged on, and I got stuck driving at night again. That drive was worse than before. Right from the start, I saw the shape in the mirror, faint at first. It didn't move much, just sat there like a shadow. After a while, I heard a rustling sound like fabric shifting. It came from the back seat. I looked over my shoulder, and of course, I saw nothing. But my skin felt cold, and my breath came in short bursts. I fiddled with the air conditioner, thinking maybe it was blowing weird. It didn't help. The rustling continued. Then I heard a quiet tap on the window behind me. Just one tap. I nearly jumped out of my seat. When I got closer to home, the shape seemed to lean forward again. This time I felt a slight pressure near my left shoulder. My entire body tensed up. My eyes stung because I was forgetting to blink. I kept telling myself to pull over, but there was no good spot on that narrow road. I pushed on, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The shape stayed there, close to me, like it was trying to whisper. I didn't hear words, but I heard a faint hiss near my ear. I felt the warmth of my own breath bouncing off the window. It made me shudder. I parked on the street when I finally got home. I was too afraid to open the back door and check. I just locked the car and ran inside. That night, I tried to watch TV to calm down, but every time I heard a noise outside, I jumped. When I finally fell asleep, I had restless dreams. I woke up feeling drained. I called my boss and asked if there was a way to cut back on the late drives. He said no. My job requires travel, and sometimes it's late. I tried to start my days earlier so I could finish before dark, but it didn't always work out. Over time, I developed a habit of constantly checking the sky. If the sun started setting, I felt that swirl of panic in my stomach. My coworkers asked if I was okay. I said I was just tired. I didn't want to tell them about the silhouette because it sounded crazy. But the sightings kept happening. Almost every night drive, I'd see that shape in the back seat. Sometimes it just sat there. Other times it would lean forward. A few times I felt something near my ear, like a breath or a whisper. I never understood what it wanted. I never heard a voice clearly, just quiet hisses or faint rustling. I started playing loud music to drown it out. I tried opening all the windows, hoping the airflow would break the feeling. It never helped for long. Sometimes I turned on the overhead light, but it only made me more nervous, because I'd be staring at the back seat, waiting for that shape to appear in the light. It never did. It only showed up in darkness or in low light. One night I tried driving with the dome light on the whole time. I thought it would stop. It didn't. I glanced at the mirror and saw the outline anyway. I began checking the car during the day, looking for signs of a problem. Maybe I had a reflection from something stuck under a seat. But there was nothing. My seats were clean, and I had no shiny objects in the back. I considered going to an eye doctor, but I saw everything else perfectly. My vision was normal except for this one disturbing phenomenon. Weeks turned into months. I grew more and more anxious. Every time I had to drive late, my shoulders felt tense. My palms got sweaty the moment the sun dipped below the horizon. I avoided rest stops because I was afraid to return to the car. I forced myself to keep going, but my nerves were shot. I had trouble sleeping. I jumped at small noises in my house. I hated feeling so powerless. I tried talking out loud during drives, telling the silhouette to leave me alone. It never answered. It never disappeared for good either. Then one weekend, I had a longer trip that required driving through the night to get to a conference by morning. I couldn't get out of it. I set off around 6 p.m., hoping to cover as many miles as possible before dark. That evening, the roads were busy for a while. I didn't notice anything for the first hour or two, but once the traffic thinned out and the sky turned black, that old feeling crept in. I looked at the mirror. There it was, barely visible. My heart raced. I told myself to pull over at the next exit and get a coffee. I did, but it didn't help. Back on the highway, the shape returned. My muscles ached from how tightly I was gripping the wheel. Around midnight, I felt something move behind me, like a slight shift in weight on the seat. I caught a glimpse of a hand, just the outline on the edge of the back seat. I gasped. I jerked my head around, but I only saw empty seats. The night seemed quiet, but in my mind, it was chaotic. I felt like I was losing control. My breath came in quick bursts. My chest felt tight. I had to tell myself over and over, just get through it. Just get to the hotel. An hour later, I felt the presence leaning closer than ever. I thought I might feel a touch on my shoulder. I braced myself and my skin crawled. My mind raced with possible explanations. None of it made sense. I realized my shirt was damp from sweat. The seatbelt felt like it was strangling me, but I didn't dare release it. I kept my eyes on the road. I tried not to blink. I was scared that if I looked away, it would do something worse. I started whispering, "Go away," over and over. By the time I reached the hotel, I was shaking all over. My head felt light. My mouth was dry. I parked under a bright light in the lot, grabbed my luggage and hurried inside. I almost forgot to lock the car. I ended up sleeping only a few hours, haunted by every thought of that silhouette. That was the trip that convinced me I couldn't keep living like this. Now, whenever possible, I end my day before the sun sets. I plan my routes to avoid late drives. My coworkers think I'm overreacting. I don't care. I tell them I have night vision problems or that I prefer to rest early. I don't admit the real reason. I'm embarrassed to say I see something sitting in my back seat. It sounds ridiculous, but I know what I've seen. I can't deny how it makes me feel. There's no doubt in my mind that something sits there, staring at me, no matter how impossible it seems. These days, I keep my drives short at night. If I can't avoid it, I try to bring someone with me. I've never seen the silhouette when there's another person in the car. It only shows up when I'm alone. That detail makes me even more uneasy. I don't know what it is or why it appears. I just know I can't handle it alone anymore. I feel like my nerves are shot and my patience is gone. I can't sleep well after any night drive. Even writing this, I feel a knot in my stomach. The memory of that shape, leaning close to my shoulder, makes me shiver. I've changed my schedule and I refuse any work trips that involve late-night driving. It's hurting my career, but I can't do those hours anymore. People have asked me why I'm suddenly so strict about my schedule. I make up excuses about personal obligations. The truth is, I don't want to be trapped in the car with that thing ever again. Every time I glance at the rearview mirror in the dark, I feel a wave of dread. I can't function like that, and I can't explain it to anyone who hasn't experienced it. I wish I had some grand conclusion, but I don't. I haven't found a solution, and I haven't gotten rid of it. I just avoid giving it a chance to appear. If I do have to drive late, I feel that same old fear rising in my chest. I stare at the mirror, terrified I'll see the silhouette again. Sometimes I think I catch a glimpse, but I shut my eyes hard and open them again, hoping it's gone. Other times, I just keep my gaze forward until I can pull over somewhere safe. Then I sit there, breathing fast, waiting for my heart to stop racing. That's my story. It might sound insane or superstitious, But that's exactly what's been happening to me. I see a shape in my back seat at night. It only appears when I'm alone. It sometimes leans close to me like it wants to whisper something. I never hear clear words, just the faint suggestion of breath on my ear. And that's enough to make me avoid nighttime driving for good. I froze the first time I heard those muffled moans coming from the locked room down the hall. The rest of my house felt normal. The kitchen light was off, the living room was quiet, and the hallway lamp buzzed like it always did. But that night, there was this low, strained sound behind that door, and it made the hair on my arm stand up. I hadn't gone near that room in months. I never really used it. I just kept it locked and ignored it. But those sounds put me on edge, so I grabbed my keys and went to check. That was the night I found the chair in the middle of the room, even though I was sure I had never brought any furniture in there. Now I can't walk past that door without feeling a chill under my skin. Sometimes the chair faces the door directly, as if someone was sitting there waiting for me. I want to explain how everything happened step by step so it's clear why I'm this jumpy. I bought this house a few years ago. It has 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, and a small living room. I work from home sometimes, so I thought I should have a designated office. But when I moved in, I never felt like setting it up. Something about the atmosphere in that room turned me off. The walls were plain white. The floor had cheap tiles, and there was a single window facing the street. Every time I stepped inside, I felt colder. I would leave the door open at first, but I eventually started keeping it locked just because it felt pointless to go in there. I had a spare key in a kitchen drawer, and I never thought twice about it until that night. I was sitting in the living room around 11 p.m., watching some random show on TV when I heard this dull thumping sound. It was so quiet I thought it might be the pipes, or maybe my neighbors. But then it turned into what sounded like muffled crying or moaning. I muted the TV and listened. It was definitely coming from the hallway. My ears were straining and my heart was beating faster. I told myself it was just a weird plumbing issue, but it didn't stop. It kept going in short bursts, like someone trying to speak through a pillow. I got up and walked slowly toward the hallway. The door to that spare room was closed, the same as always. The moans got a bit louder when I stood in front of it. I felt this chill roll through my chest. I put my hand on the knob, but it was locked. That made me feel stupid for a second because, of course, I always kept it locked. I stood there, trying to decide if I was imagining all of it. Then I hurried back to the kitchen and dug through the drawer until I found the key. I went back to that door, took a breath, and slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. I could still hear those muffled sounds, faint and strained. When I opened the door, the lights were off and I couldn't see anything. It looked as empty as always, just a rectangle of darkness. But the moans stopped immediately, and my chest tightened. I felt for the light switch on the wall. It clicked, and the overhead light flickered to life. The room was empty except for a wooden chair right in the center. It was one of those standard chairs with 4 legs and a flat back. I knew for a fact I had never put a chair in there. I had no furniture in that room at all, yet there it was. I stood there in the doorway staring at that chair, waiting for something else to happen. My heart was thumping, and I was breathing hard. But the room was silent. No moans, no creaking, no footsteps. I stepped inside carefully, like I was afraid of disturbing whatever had been making that noise. The floor felt cold under my socks. I walked around the chair, trying to see if there was something on it or around it that explained anything. It looked ordinary. A few scratches on the seat, some worn edges, nothing special. I touched the back of it and felt the wood. It was smooth but cold. I glanced at the window. It was locked from the inside. The entire room was locked from the outside. Nobody could have just walked in here and placed a chair. That didn't make sense. But I also knew I hadn't put it there. I felt a surge of confusion and fear. My stomach twisted. I backed out of the room, still facing that chair. Then I switched off the light and shut the door. My hands were shaking when I locked it again. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about that chair. I kept thinking I might hear more sounds, but the house stayed quiet. The next morning I tried to shrug it off. I told myself maybe I'd forgotten putting the chair there at some random point. I felt silly and tried to put it out of my mind, but I couldn't. A couple of days went by. I didn't hear anything else at night, but whenever I walked past that door, I felt the temperature drop. The hallway was usually a bit warm, because the sun hits that part of the house in the afternoons. But when I got near the spare room, it felt like stepping into an air-conditioned building. My arms would prickle with goosebumps, and I'd walk away as fast as I could. Then one morning I was heading out to run errands. As I passed the door, I had this urge to check on the chair. I stood there with my keys in hand, heart pounding, not sure if I really wanted to open that door again. I told myself I needed to see if the chair was still there or if my mind had been playing tricks. So I unlocked the door, swung it open, and turned on the light. The chair was there, but it was slightly angled, like it had been turned toward the doorway. It wasn't pointing straight ahead like the last time I saw it. The difference was subtle, but it was definitely pointed at me. I shut the door and left the house. My hands were shaking as I locked the front door. My mind raced with explanations that didn't make sense. Maybe the chair wasn't aligned before and I just never noticed. But I knew what I saw. It felt like something or someone had moved it, like someone had sat there facing the door. I drove around, ran my errands, and tried not to think about it. But whenever I recalled that image, my neck felt tight. Later that day, I came back and forced myself to look again. It was around 3 p.m., and sunlight was coming in through the window in the living room. I felt braver during the daytime. I walked to the spare room door, unlocked it, and flicked on the overhead light. The chair was still in the middle of the room, still angled toward the door. Nothing else was unusual. The window was locked. The corners were empty. No footprints or scuff marks on the floor. Everything else looked pristine, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hairs on my neck, my stomach churned. I locked the door again and went back to the living room, trying to calm down. I started to avoid that part of the house. I'd catch myself glancing at the door out of the corner of my eye like I was waiting for it to open on its own. At night, I made sure all the windows and doors were locked. Sometimes I'd still hear faint noises, but I told myself it was the old pipes or the wind outside. There were nights I got up to check the front door or the back window, just to make sure everything was secure. I didn't want to admit how rattled I was, but my body felt tense all the time. About a week later, something new happened. I was in bed trying to sleep when I heard a single thump in the hallway. It sounded like something had been dropped on the floor. My heart thumped in my chest and I rolled onto my side, staring at the bedroom door. I didn't want to get up, but I couldn't ignore it. I crept out of bed and into the hallway. The spare room door was still closed. I put my hand on the knob. It was cold, colder than the rest of the hallway. I turned the knob and it clicked. The door was locked, just like I'd left it. I leaned my ear against it. I didn't hear anything. No moans, no thumps, nothing. Eventually, I went back to bed, but my head kept spinning. The next morning, I decided to call a friend of mine who's practical and level-headed. I told him I was hearing noises and that there was a random chair in my spare room that I didn't remember putting there. He laughed and said I was probably overthinking it. I asked him to come over and see for himself. He arrived that afternoon. I led him straight to the door and unlocked it. The chair was there, but now it looked like it was back to its original position. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, eyebrows raised. He walked around the chair, glanced at the window, knocked on the walls, even sat on the chair for a moment. He didn't see anything odd. He said, "Dude, it's just a chair. Maybe the previous owner left it. You probably forgot." I felt frustrated because I knew something else was going on, but I didn't argue with him. I let him have his look, and then we left the room. He stayed for a beer and we talked about other things. He left around dusk, and I was alone again. I felt somewhat calmer after his visit, but that calm went away as soon as I passed by that door at night. I still felt a rush of cold air. I tried to ignore it. A few days later, I went to the door again, feeling annoyed and tired of being scared. I turned the key in the lock. but it resisted at first. That was strange because the lock was usually smooth. I finally got it open, flicked the switch, and saw that the chair was facing the wall, not the door. It was turned completely around. That made my skin crawl. The air smelled stale, and I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I walked in, touched the chair, and tried to move it back to the center. My hands were sweaty. The moment I placed my hands on it, I felt a jolt of cold, like the wood had been sitting in a freezer. I pulled back for a second, then forced myself to grab it again and move it. I dragged it closer to the window just to see if that would change anything. I left the room, locked the door, and paced around my living room. My heart was racing, and my mind was jumbled. I felt anger mixed with fear. I wanted to know if someone was sneaking into my house. I checked every window, every door, every possible entrance, all locked. I even climbed into the attic. It was dusty and empty. No one was hiding up there. I went back downstairs. Everything felt normal except that spare room. That night, I decided to sit in the hallway for a while, just to see if I heard anything. I sat on the floor outside the spare room door, with the hallway light off, and listened. My back got stiff and my legs got cramped, but I stayed there, staring at the faint outline of the door. The house was silent except for the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I lasted about an hour before I gave up. Nothing happened while I was there. But the moment I stood up to leave, I thought I heard a soft scrape on the other side of the door, like the legs of the chair moving. I froze, my hand on the wall for balance. My breath felt short. I thought about unlocking the door to check, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I went to my bedroom, closed the door, and got into bed, heart pounding. Over the next week, I avoided opening that door. But every time I walked by, I felt that blast of cold air, and it made my skin break out in goosebumps. I had trouble concentrating on work. My phone calls with friends sounded forced because I didn't want to share what was going on, and I couldn't think of anything else. I started having weird dreams about sitting in that chair in a dark room, staring at my own bedroom door. I'd wake up covered in sweat, and I'd check my clock to see it was always around 3 a.m. Finally, one morning, I got fed up and decided I would open that door in full daylight, move the chair out of the room, and see if anything changed. I marched over with a sense of determination. My chest was tight, but I kept telling myself it was just a room and a piece of furniture. I unlocked the door. The light flicked on. The chair was facing the door again, but closer than before. It felt like it had been inched forward. The distance between the chair and the doorway was smaller. I stood there, my hand gripping the doorknob. My arms felt heavy. My eyes teared up from a mix of nerves and frustration. I forced myself to walk up to the chair. I grabbed it by the top rail and pulled it toward the hallway. It made this scraping sound that echoed in the empty room. My heart was hammering. I dragged it out into the hallway. Then I leaned it against the wall in the corridor. I stared at it for a moment, half expecting something to yank it back into the room. But nothing happened. I exhaled a long breath and looked back into the room. It was empty. No furniture, no boxes, no shadows that looked out of place. I left the door open and walked back toward the living room. I was about halfway there when I felt that cold blast again, except this time it washed over my back. I spun around. The door to the spare room had slammed shut on its own. I jumped. My hands shook. The chair was still in the hallway, so it wasn't that. I took a few steps toward the door, hand outstretched, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the knob again. My mouth was dry. My legs felt weak. That's how things have stayed. The chair is in the hallway right now, leaning against the wall. I haven't tried to open that door again. I still feel the cold whenever I pass by. Sometimes I swear I hear a muffled sound late at night, but I won't go check. The tension in my chest is there all the time. I keep replaying that moment when I found the chair in the dark, completely out of place in a locked room. I know I should just pack up my stuff and leave this house, but I also feel stuck here. It's my home, or at least it was supposed to be. I can't see behind that door without unlocking it again, but I'm not sure I want to. All I know is that the room was never right from the start. I keep telling myself it's just an empty space with a single window, nothing more. But the cold is real, the sounds are real, and the position of that chair always changed. I don't understand it, and I'm not sure I want to. For now, I'm going to stay out of there. I don't know if that will help, but it's the only thing I can bring myself to do. Maybe one day I'll work up the nerve to get rid of that door entirely. But for now, I avoid that part of the house, and I sleep with the lights on, just trying to keep calm until morning. I walked into my house on a Tuesday morning with a cordless drill in my hand and a head full of renovation plans. I never expected to feel uneasy in my own hallway. But the moment I looked under the old wooden handrail at the bottom of the stairs, everything changed. I spotted an odd set of markings carved into the underside of the rail. They were rough but precise enough to look intentional. I crouched down, rubbed away some dust, and saw strange symbols. They weren't in any language I recognized. They looked almost like scratches, but they formed a pattern that made me think someone had done this a long time ago with a steady hand. I felt my chest tighten. I stayed there, crouched by the steps, and tried to trace the carvings with my fingers. The wood felt splintered, and there was a faint smell, like old varnish and something stale. I got a slight shiver, but I told myself it was just the draft coming from the open window. I took a picture with my phone, hoping to search for similar images later. Then I got up, set my drill aside, and checked the rest of the railing. I didn't see anything else like those symbols. The top side looked normal. The spindles felt solid. I told myself it was probably a prank by some previous owner, but something about those markings bugged me. I had a plan for the day. I wanted to replace a few loose boards on the landing and maybe patch up some drywall. I tried to ignore the weird inscription in my head. Around midday, I took a break and made a quick sandwich. My phone was on the counter, so I opened the photo app and zoomed in on the carving. The lines were jagged, and the shapes didn't look like letters from any alphabet I knew. I felt uneasy, but I also felt a pull. I wanted to figure out what they meant. I did a quick online search with random keywords like strange carvings under stairs, but I got pictures of designs that looked nothing like what I had. I finished my sandwich and went back to work. By late afternoon, I decided I'd had enough for one day. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, turned on some music, and tried to relax. The next morning, I went back to renovating. I carried a box of spare tiles up the stairs to the second floor. Halfway up, I paused because I thought I heard something. It was a small sound like a whisper coming from behind me. I stopped on the step and listened. There was nothing else, so I shook it off and kept going. Later, I came downstairs for a tape measure. As I reached the bottom step, I heard it again, but this time it sounded like someone saying my name in a low tone. It made the hair on my arms stand up. I muttered to myself that I was tired and probably imagining things. But it kept happening. Every time I went up or down the stairs, I heard a faint voice. Sometimes it was just a mumble. Other times it sounded like it was calling me out, almost scolding me. I started to feel a dull ache in my gut every time I approached the stairs. My palms got sweaty and my heart would beat faster. I told myself it was stress. The renovation was taking a toll, plus I was probably just spooked by that weird inscription. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the stairs, or with the handrail itself. On Friday night, I was in the living room watching an old action movie. I paused it to grab some snacks from the kitchen. When I walked into the hallway, I felt a chill even though the heater was on. The stairs looked the same as always. Same old polished wood, same slight creaks when I took a step. But the hush in the hallway felt heavy. I tried to ignore it, but as I took the first step up, I heard a soft whisper. I couldn't make out words, but it sounded like a moan. I froze. I held my breath and listened. The faint voice repeated my name. It was distant, but it felt like it was coming from the wood itself. My heart pounded. I looked around the hallway. No one was there. I swallowed hard and forced myself up the stairs. Each step made a soft thud, and I got the feeling I was interrupting someone. My shoulders tightened. By the time I reached the top, I was breathing fast and my chest felt tight. I avoided the stairs for the rest of the night. I stayed in the living room until I got too tired. Then I forced myself to go up to my bedroom. I tried to do it quickly, almost running up. I felt silly, but I also felt cornered by something I couldn't see. My sleep that night was restless. I dreamed of hearing my name repeated in the hallway. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I had to face the stairs again if I wanted to get my day started. I took a shower, dressed, and stood at the top of the staircase. I looked down. The wood looked plain. The banister looked a bit worn. I could see where the carving was hidden underneath. I exhaled and started my descent one step at a time. I heard a low murmur. It was faint, but it was there. I felt my throat go dry. When I got halfway down, the murmur turned into a hiss. It stretched out like someone exhaling. I almost tripped on the last step. My legs felt shaky. I decided I had enough of this. I wanted to remove the entire handrail and replace it. But I felt stuck. A part of me believed that if I ripped out that carved piece, I might make things worse. I didn't know what I believed in exactly, but I knew how I felt around those symbols. They gave me a sense of dread that I didn't want to provoke. I sat on the couch and stared at the staircase. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe these voices were in my head. Maybe I was dealing with old house noises that my brain turned into whispers. But the way the voice seemed to speak my name felt personal. It felt like it knew me. I didn't like that thought at all. I went to the garage and rummaged through a stack of old books and manuals that came with the house. I found some records from previous owners, but nothing that mentioned the stairs. I felt restless, so I drove to a local hardware store for supplies. I told myself I'd get a new piece of wood for the railing, just in case I decided to replace it. I walked through the aisles, grabbing nails and spackle, but when I got to the lumber section, I hesitated. My hands clenched at my sides. I had this mental image of prying off the old handrail and hearing something roar from the hidden side of the stairs. It made my stomach twist. I left without buying the new rail. Back home, I ate a quick lunch and tried to distract myself with other tasks. I patched some holes in the kitchen, replaced a leaky faucet, and swept up debris from the living room floor. But every time I passed the entrance to the hallway, my eyes darted to the stairs. I felt a dull pressure in my head, like I needed to keep watch. In the late afternoon, I couldn't avoid going upstairs. I needed some documents from my desk in the spare room. I approached the stairs slowly, holding onto the wall. I placed one foot on the first step, then another. My pulse was loud in my ears. About 3 steps up, I heard my name again, in a low, drawn-out tone. I stiffened. My skin prickled. I wanted to turn around, but I forced myself forward. My mouth felt dry and my tongue felt heavy. There was a slight vibration under my hand when I touched the banister. At the top, I hurried into the spare room and closed the door behind me. My heart was pounding, and my throat felt tight. I tried to calm myself by opening the window and letting in some fresh air. I collected the documents I needed, but I lingered in the room for a while, not wanting to face the stairs again. Eventually, the daylight started to fade, and I had no choice but to head back down. When I opened the door, the hallway was quiet. The small overhead light cast shadows on the steps. I swallowed hard and started down. This time, the voice was louder, like a hushed growl. My name came out of it in a broken way. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I gripped the handrail to steady myself, but it felt cold even though the air in the house was warm. I made it to the bottom and darted into the living room. My legs felt weak. I set the documents on the coffee table and pressed my hands against my face. I stayed like that for a few minutes, just breathing. Then I looked at my phone, thinking I should call someone. But who would I call about this? Nobody I knew would understand. I decided to try something else. I grabbed a flashlight and a small chisel from the toolbox, and I went back to the stairs. I knelt at the bottom near the spot where I'd first seen the carving. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it at the inscriptions. I decided to test a corner of the carved wood to see if it would chip away easily. My hand shook. I pressed the chisel lightly and I heard a scratchy sound. It felt like I was prying into something that didn't want to be touched. I had a strong urge to stop. My chest tightened again. I left the chisel where it was and stepped back. I retreated to the kitchen and washed my hands. I felt uneasy, like I had almost crossed a line. My stomach rumbled, but I didn't feel hungry. I tried to drink some water, but it went down my throat like a rock. I closed my eyes and remembered the voice calling me by name. It sounded disapproving, like it was warning me, or accusing me. My breathing got shallow, and I had to focus on inhaling slowly. I grabbed a fold-up chair and placed it in the hallway, facing the stairs. I sat there with my elbows on my knees, watching the steps in silence. The house was quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional whoosh of a car passing outside. The hallway light flickered once, and my heart skipped a beat. I stayed there for maybe 30 minutes listening. I didn't hear the voice, but I felt a weird tension, like the air was denser. Eventually, I got up and went to the living room. I was exhausted. I turned on the TV, hoping to drown out my thoughts. I watched random shows until my eyes grew heavy. Around midnight, I forced myself upstairs to sleep. This time, the voice was quiet, but I felt like I was being watched. My skin tingled. I moved as fast as I could, almost stumbling onto the landing. Over the next few days, the whispers didn't go away. They got sharper. It sounded like more than one voice, sometimes muttering together. The volume rose and fell. My nerves were shot. My back hurt from tension and I couldn't eat well. I kept picturing that inscription under the railing. I wanted to tear it out, but every time I thought about doing that, my gut twisted. The idea of possibly releasing whatever energy was trapped there felt worse than the current situation. One afternoon, while I was sanding down some old paint in the hallway, I heard the voices start up again. I got so startled I dropped the sander. It thumped against the hardwood floor and left a scuff. I picked it up and turned it off. The voices kept going, but they were faint. I gritted my teeth, marched to the stairs, and placed my hand on the railing. The wood felt icy. I forced myself to slide my palm along the rail from bottom to top. I moved slowly. My chest felt like it was on fire. I heard hushed speech, like someone was chanting. I didn't recognize any words, but they sounded angry. I pulled my hand away when I reached the top. My entire arm was shaking. I went straight to my bedroom, locked the door, and sat on the bed. My eyes darted around the room. My breathing was fast. I told myself I needed help, but I didn't know what kind. A contractor wouldn't know what to do about voices. A friend would probably think I was losing my mind. I checked the time. It was barely past noon, but I felt drained. I lay down for a while, but I couldn't sleep. By the evening, I decided to call an old buddy of mine who was into weird artifacts and history. I just wanted to see if he'd ever heard of carvings like this. I sent him the photo I had taken and asked if he knew anything about it. He replied that he'd seen something kind of similar in an antique shop once, but he wasn't sure what it meant. I didn't mention the voices. I just said I was curious if it was some old family crest or code. When I got off the phone, I looked at the time. It was getting late. My stomach growled, so I went to the kitchen. I made a simple dinner and ate it quietly, thinking about the next day. I wondered if the voices would keep getting worse. I wondered if the carving might extend somewhere else under the stairs. Maybe it wrapped around somewhere I couldn't see. I felt restless, but also too scared to start ripping apart the wood. My hands shook when I lifted my fork. Now it's nighttime again. I'm standing in the hallway, staring at that old handrail. My body is tense. My heart is beating hard in my chest. I keep thinking about the chisel in the toolbox. If I tear out this rail, will the voices get louder, or will they disappear? Will something else come out of the wood? I can't answer that. But I know that I can't live like this forever, hearing those faint calls every time I go upstairs. I'm too on edge to decide right now. So I leave the stairs alone for one more night. I turn off the hallway light, walk into the living room and sit on the couch. I can hear the soft creaking of the house settling. My ears strain for any sign of that whisper. I tell myself that tomorrow I might take action. Maybe tomorrow I'll find the nerve to tear out that rail. Or maybe I'll just walk away and pretend none of this is real. But I can't pretend. I've heard it. It calls my name every day and it won't stop. I'm afraid of what might happen if I break that wood and destroy whatever's carved there. But I'm also afraid of living with it. Right now, I'm just sitting here, trying to steady my breathing, listening for any hint of that low voice. So far, it's quiet. But I don't feel relief. I feel like something is waiting. And I know that sooner or later, I have to make a choice. I never planned to spend more than a few days at that old place, but everything changed on my first night. My grandparents left me their ranch, and I thought it would be peaceful. I imagined simple repairs, fresh air, and quiet evenings. I did not expect strange smells, heavy claw marks, or loud banging noises coming from the barn. I certainly did not expect to feel that kind of fear in my own property. Now I cannot get those nights out of my mind. I want to explain what happened. I want to be clear and direct, so there is no confusion about what I experienced. This is not something I can forget or ignore. It keeps me awake, replaying every detail in my head. Here is how it all started. When I first arrived at the ranch, I spent a few hours unpacking in the main house. The place looked worn down. The paint on the outside walls peeled in long strips. The porch steps squeaked when I walked on them, and some boards felt unstable. I made a note to fix them soon. The living room had old furniture covered by dusty sheets. I removed them, opened the windows, and let in some fresh air. The place smelled like mold and stale wood. I coughed a few times because the dust filled my throat. After a while, I found a broom and started sweeping. It felt like a normal chore. I was tired but determined to make the place feel livable again. Around midday, I decided to check the barn at the far end of the property. My father always said the barn was older than the house. He claimed it was built by my great-grandfather for livestock, but it had not seen animals in a long time. The ground around the barn looked hard and cracked. Weeds pushed up through the dirt in patches, and the old barn door sagged on its hinges. I smelled something musty even before I opened the door. When I pushed it, the hinges groaned, and a sudden rush of stale air hit my face. Inside, dust floated in the narrow beams of sunlight that came through the gaps in the walls. I looked around. The barn was empty, except for a few rotten planks, some rusted tools, and a large wooden crate in one corner. The ground was uneven. There was dirt and straw in random spots. I felt an odd chill, but I ignored it at first. I checked the walls on the left side and noticed deep scratches. They looked like claw marks. Each line dug into the wood, leaving rough edges. I remember running my hand over them. The grooves were about as long as my hand. They looked like they were made by something with thick claws. I felt my pulse speed up, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe an animal got locked inside at some point. That was my first thought. But I saw multiple sets of these scratches, some higher, some lower. They crisscrossed, as if whatever made them tried to break out from different angles. I walked along the wall, following the marks. Toward the back corner, I saw a broken section of wood about knee-height. The edges looked splintered and torn outward. Something might have forced its way out. Next to that opening, I noticed footprints. They were large, bigger than any dog or coyote print I had seen. The shape was strange, not like a clean paw print. It looked more spread out, and the ground showed a dragging path, as if the creature walked with a heavy limp. I crouched down. The prints led to the rear of the barn, then stopped near a pile of stacked boards. I felt a wave of unease. My heart pounded. I touched the ground. The dirt felt cold and compact, but I could make out the shape of something like toes or claws. I did not see fresh droppings or anything else that might explain it. I stood up and tried to push the strange feeling away. I took a few deep breaths and decided I needed to keep exploring. The barn smelled old, but I also caught a slight odor in the air that reminded me of wet fur. I thought maybe a raccoon or something larger had been living inside. I walked around the perimeter, looking at every corner. I did not see any animals or fresh signs of life, but the scratches and footprints stayed in my mind. I checked my watch and realized the day was moving fast. I headed back to the house to fix myself something to eat. I had simple supplies: bread, canned soup, bottled water. I decided to eat on the porch. The sun was setting and the sky turned a pale orange. The wind felt cool on my face. The ranch was quiet, except for occasional rustling in the trees. At some point, I looked over at the barn. It seemed darker than everything else around it, like it absorbed all the remaining light. I tried not to stare for too long. The idea of those strange marks and footprints made me uneasy, but I told myself there had to be a normal explanation. That night, I settled into the old bedroom. The mattress was stiff, and the sheets felt rough. I had not brought much with me besides a small duffel bag of clothes and my phone. I closed my eyes, but I found it hard to sleep. Every time I drifted off, I thought I heard a noise outside. After a few hours, I finally managed to relax enough to doze. Then in the middle of the night, I woke up to a muffled bang. At first, I lay there trying to figure out if I was dreaming. Then I heard another bang. It sounded like something hitting the barn door. I got out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and walked carefully to the window. I did not see movement. The barn looked dark and still, but the sound came again, a heavy thud on wood. My heart thumped in my chest. I threw on some jeans and shoes, then walked outside. The air felt cold against my arms. I smelled something sharp in the breeze, like singed hair or burnt rubber. My pulse quickened. I approached the barn slowly. Each step kicked up small clouds of dust. When I was about 10 feet away, I heard a low growl from inside. The growl was deep and continuous, like an animal warning me. I stopped. I shone my flashlight around the door. I saw the old wood trembling slightly, as if something pushed against it from the inside. My hands started to shake, and I fought the urge to run back to the house. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded shaky in my ears. The growling stopped. I waited for a reply or more noise. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then I heard a soft scrape against the door, like claws dragging across the surface. I felt my mouth go dry. The odor of wet fur and burnt material grew stronger. It made me want to gag. I was sweating despite the cold air. I took a step forward and placed my hand on the door. It vibrated with a low thud from the other side, then everything went quiet. I held my breath, listening for anything else. My flashlight shook in my hand, casting jittery beams of light on the ground. I realized I could not just stand there all night. I slowly pulled the barn door. It made a loud creak. I pointed the flashlight inside. The beam lit up some of the straw on the floor, part of a support beam, and then empty space. I did not see any creature. My eyes scanned the corners. Nothing moved. The place smelled awful, like wet dog fur mixed with burned wood. I stepped in, shining the light around. No sign of animals or footprints. I crouched low and aimed the flashlight at the far wall. I saw fresh scratches that looked recent. The wood shards on the floor looked fresh too. The marks trailed off to the side, ending near that broken section of wall. I wanted to check outside around the back, but the barn door suddenly slammed shut behind me. I jumped and nearly dropped the flashlight. My heart hammered. I spun around, grabbed the door handle and pulled it open again. The wind gusted, hitting my face as I stepped out. I looked around, shining the flashlight in every direction. I did not see anything moving. My breathing sounded rough in my ears. I felt exhausted and scared. I hurried back to the house, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night on the couch with the lights on. My mind raced with possibilities. A big stray dog, a bear, or something else. But none of it felt right. The footprints had that strange shape, and the smell was so strong. Also, I had never seen or heard of a bear around that region, and the ranch is far from any typical bear habitat. The next morning, I woke up with a stiff back and a headache. My mouth tasted bitter. I heated up some coffee on the old stove and tried to steady my nerves. I was not prepared for whatever was in that barn, but I wanted answers. I finished my coffee, then got my work boots, gloves, and a heavier flashlight. I also grabbed a pry bar, thinking I might need it. The sun was up and the ranch looked calm. The barn door hung slightly open. exactly how I left it. I went in, forcing myself to check every corner again. The smell was weaker during the day, but I could still notice that wet fur odor. It clung to the old wood. I checked behind the stack of boards, under the old crates, and along the walls. I found nothing living or dead. I focused on the new scratches. They looked different from the ones I saw the day before. They were fresher, with clean lines where wood had been torn. I found a single clump of coarse hair stuck to a splinter. It was dark gray, almost black, and it felt oily between my fingers. I used a small plastic bag to collect it. I was not sure why. I guessed I could show it to someone who might identify the animal. Deep inside, I worried that it might not match any common animal around here. I stayed quiet and kept working, checking around the base of the barn. I found another set of footprints near the back entrance. They followed a short path toward a row of bushes, then vanished. I decided to clear out more debris, hoping to figure out if something had a hidden nest. Hours passed without any clear sign of a lair. Eventually, I stopped to eat lunch. I sat on an overturned bucket near the door, chewing on a sandwich I brought from the house. While I ate, I thought I heard a faint shuffle in the corner. I paused, holding my breath. When I stood up and looked, there was nothing there. Only dust in the air and old crates stacked in the corner. I got that uneasy feeling again. My stomach tensed and I felt goosebumps on my arms. I tried to keep calm. The second night came faster than I wanted. The sun dropped behind the hills, leaving long shadows across the dirt yard. I decided to stay outside for a while, watching the barn from a distance to see if anything approached. I stood near my truck, leaning against the side. I kept a flashlight in my hand and the pry bar within reach. Crickets chirped in the tall grass. A light breeze brushed against my face. After about an hour, I saw movement near the barn door. It was a quick blur. The door rattled once and then fell still. I walked closer, shining the flashlight, but I saw no shape. My heart pounded. I could not see any animal or person. I kept the light on the door for a full minute, waiting for more movement. Nothing else happened. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. I heard something rustle near the corner of the barn. I swung the flashlight over. The beam lit up the weeds and the old fence. Still no clear shape. Then I caught a glimpse of two eyes reflecting the light for half a second before they disappeared behind the fence. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The eyes seemed spaced too far apart for a normal animal, but I was not sure. My hands shook and I tried to keep the flashlight steady. I did not hear footsteps, but I sensed something big moving in the dark. After that moment, the noise stopped again. I felt alone in the yard, but I knew that was not the case. Something was out there. I stayed up late, pacing between the barn and the house. I kept trying to get a glimpse to catch the creature in the open, but I never saw it clearly. Occasionally, I heard that low growl from inside the barn or behind it. Every time I got close, it vanished. The smell of wet fur would fill my nose, and sometimes I caught a whiff of something burnt, like scorched hair. My stomach turned each time. By the early hours of the morning, I was running on adrenaline. I wanted answers, but I also felt a growing desire to leave. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. I found fresh scratches, new footprints, and more clumps of dark, oily hair. The barn door had fresh dents, as if it was being slammed from the inside. Some mornings I discovered sections of wood that looked partially charred, like they had been exposed to a quick burst of heat. I considered calling animal control or a ranger, but I had no idea how to explain it. I also worried they would think I was losing it. I ended up boarding the barn door with extra planks and nails. That did not stop the nightly noises. The banging continued, and the growling echoed across the yard. I barely slept. My body felt weak from lack of rest, and I jumped at every small sound. By the end of the week, I was on edge. On my final night there, I decided I could not handle it anymore. I was in the living room, sitting in the old armchair with a lamp turned on. I heard the barn door shaking in the distance. I felt my heart rate spike. My hands felt clammy. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight and pry bar, and marched to the front porch. I felt a rush of anger and fear. I walked right up to the barn, ignoring my racing pulse. The door rattled from the inside. I banged on it with the pry bar. "I know you're in there," I yelled. My voice trembled, but I was desperate for an answer. I heard a sharp growl, deeper than before. It vibrated through the wood. My knees felt weak. The smell of wet fur hit me like a punch. I coughed and felt tears in my eyes from the intensity of it. Then everything went silent. I must have stood there for a minute, holding that pry bar, breathing hard. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. I felt my whole body trembling. The barn door did not move again. The silence felt heavy, as if the air itself was thick. I took a step back. I realized I could not fight this thing or chase it off. I felt my fear rise again. I decided to leave the boards in place, go inside, lock every door, and figure out my next move in the morning. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, hearing occasional knocks and growls. But I refused to go out again. My body was too tense and my nerves were shot. At sunrise, I packed my truck. I did not bother to finish all the repairs. I locked the house, checked the barn from a distance, and left the property. During the drive, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something chasing me. I have not gone back since. I still own the place, but I cannot bring myself to spend another night there. I told a few friends about my experiences, but I kept the details vague. I do not need people thinking I am unstable. The truth is, I have no explanation for the deep scratches, the footprints, or the strange smells and sounds. All I know is that something out there does not want me in that barn. Whatever it is, I felt its presence every night. That is my account of what happened. I did not see a body or find a clear sign of what exactly it was. I never saw it up close in the daylight, and nobody got hurt. I left before something worse could happen. I know the barn is still there, and I sometimes wonder if that thing is still lurking inside. Maybe it still prowls around the property at night, dragging its feet, scratching the walls, and burning the wood somehow. I cannot be certain. All I know is, I am not stepping foot in that barn again. That place is off limits to me now. I still think about it when I try to sleep. I can hear the growls in my mind, and I can smell the wet fur and the burning odor like it is right under my nose. I do not know if I will ever get rid of that memory. It feels too real, too raw, too present. For now, I stay away and hope that is enough. I've always considered myself a practical guy. I don't jump at shadows, and I don't look for hidden meanings in everyday things. But right now, I can't ignore what's happening in my home office. There's an old armchair in there that belonged to my father. Lately, it's been making sounds like soft sighs whenever I sit down. It's not me. I know my own breathing. These sighs feel like they're coming from someone else who's sharing the seat with me. It sounds weird. It feels weirder. I've tried getting up fast, but I swear I feel hands holding me back for a moment. And that's not even the worst part. I left that armchair turned toward the wall one day, and when I came back, it was facing my desk again. No one else was in the house, and I can't find a rational explanation for how it moved. This is the story of what's been happening. I'm writing this down because I need to get it straight in my own mind. I figure if I list each thing that's happened, maybe I can find some pattern or explanation. Also, I want to see if putting it in plain words makes it all less strange. Right now, it feels like I'm stuck in some bizarre situation that I can't talk about without sounding crazy. But I'll start at the beginning, which was about a month ago. That armchair has always been in my life. It was in my dad's study when I was growing up. After he passed it down to me, I placed it in my own home office. At first, it just felt like a comfortable seat that reminded me of him. It's not in perfect shape. The leather is cracked, and the legs squeak if I rock back too far. I still love it because it's familiar and sturdy enough to hold my weight without too much complaining. For a long time, it was just a piece of furniture I used when I wanted to read or zone out after a long day. A month ago, I started noticing things. I was sitting in the armchair reading a collection of news articles when I heard a faint sigh. At first, I assumed it was me letting out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. But then I recognized something. The sound was different from my own exhale. I paused and waited. I focused on my breathing, took a small breath in, and then let it out as quietly as I could. My breath sounded normal. That other sigh had been softer, like a whisper. I told myself it might be the old leather shifting under my weight. Chairs make noises sometimes. I tried not to dwell on it, but I felt this creeping sensation in my spine, like someone was standing behind me. I leaned forward, placed my book on the desk, and listened carefully. Everything seemed quiet. I got up slowly, feeling the back of the chair with my hand to see if there was anything weird. It's just worn leather, no tears or hidden compartments. I circled the chair. Nothing looked out of place. I tried pressing down on the seat with my hand to see if I could reproduce that sighing sound. The seat made a normal creak, not a sigh. So, I told myself it was all in my head. I even laughed a bit. Then I went to the kitchen to get some water. A few days later, the sighs became more frequent. I'd sit down to read emails or type something, and after a few minutes, I'd hear it. A soft, low, drawn-out exhale. Each time, it felt like it came from behind me or inside the chair itself. Sometimes I felt the faintest vibration against my back, like there was a slight movement in the cushion. I tried shifting my position to see if maybe the frame was flexing, but it never matched my movements. The sighs seemed to have their own pattern, like they'd happen whether I was still or not. I started to get a bit uneasy. My office is a small space. There's my desk with a computer, some bookshelves, and that armchair near the corner. Light comes in through a single window on the side. Usually I enjoy the quiet in that room, but these sighs ruined the peace. I noticed I was tensing up whenever I sat down. I'd position myself on the edge of the armchair, ready to jump up if I heard anything. But that only made me feel more jumpy. One morning, I was determined to ignore the sounds. I sat down to go over some paperwork, telling myself the sighs were just the chair settling. Then I heard it louder than before. It wasn't just a brief noise. It was like a long, contented breath someone might make when they sink into a comfortable couch. I felt my skin prickle and I froze in place. I tried to get up immediately, but I couldn't move for half a second. It was like two hands were on my shoulders, pressing me down. My heart pounded. My arms felt cold. Then, just as quickly, it released me. I stood up fast, nearly stumbling over the footrest. There was no one there. The door was closed, and the window was shut. I looked around, expecting to see something, but it was just my office, the way it always is. That experience shook me up. I told myself to calm down. Maybe my muscles locked up for a second. That can happen if you're stressed or stiff. I tried to breathe normally, and then I paced around the room. But I couldn't stop thinking about that pressure on my shoulders. It felt so real. There was warmth to it, like actual hands. The feeling stayed in my head the rest of the day. Over the next couple of weeks, the incidents kept happening. Sometimes I'd be on the armchair for just a few minutes when I'd hear a sigh. Sometimes I'd try to stand and feel that push holding me down for a brief moment. I even tried to avoid the armchair, but I like having a seat in my office that isn't the desk chair. There's something about changing positions that helps me think. So I'd sit in it again, telling myself I was imagining things, and then I'd hear another sigh. It would vary between sounding tired, sad, or almost like relief. Each time I'd get that chill down my back. One day, I decided to test the situation. I turned the armchair around so it faced the wall. I wanted to see if maybe the angle or the air vents were creating some draft that caused these sounds. It didn't make much sense, but I needed to do something. I left the armchair like that for an hour while I went to the living room to make some phone calls and clear my head. When I returned to the office, the armchair was facing the desk again. It wasn't just slightly turned, it was back in the exact spot and angle it was originally. My heart started racing. I walked around the house, calling out to see if anyone had come inside. I checked the front door and back door. Both were locked. No one else has a key to my place. I even looked out the window to see if any neighbor had noticed something. Nothing. That's when I realized I was dealing with something I couldn't label as normal household noise or a trick of my imagination. I decided to write down every time something happened with the armchair. I started a small log on my phone, noting the date, time, and a short description. It happened more often than I realized. Almost every day, I heard sighs. A few times, I felt the invisible hands for a second. One afternoon, I found the armchair pulled a foot away from where I left it. I couldn't be sure if it had moved by itself or if I might have bumped it earlier without noticing. Still, I added it to my log. My stress level went up. I found myself dreading the moment I had to enter the office, but I didn't want to get rid of the armchair. It belonged to my father, and it was one of the few things that gave me a sense of continuity. It wasn't just a random item. It was part of my family's history, so I tried to handle it like a puzzle. I tried to see if there was anything physically broken. I flipped the chair over to check the legs. They were attached securely, nothing unusual. I turned it upside down to inspect the underside. The fabric there was a bit worn, but nothing strange. I didn't see any weird compartments, no evidence of rodents or anything that could cause weird noises. I even took a flashlight and looked inside. All I saw was dust and the wooden frame. I considered contacting someone about it. A friend of mine, Sam, is into weird stories and has mentioned going on ghost tours, but I didn't want to bring it up. I kept worrying that people would think I was making it up or that I was stressed. Part of me also didn't want more attention on it. Maybe shining a spotlight on it would make it worse. So I stayed quiet. Every night, I shut the door to my office and tried not to think about the armchair. Then there was another incident that made me realize I couldn't just ignore this. I was sitting in it late one evening, trying to finish some work. I heard the sigh again. It was quiet but long, like someone leaning back and letting out all their tension in one breath. I froze. Then the entire armchair gave a small jolt, as if someone inside it had shifted their weight. The cushion under me moved a bit, and I felt that same chilling sensation over my shoulders. My hands started shaking. I tried to breathe evenly. I told myself to stay calm, but my heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I stood up, bracing myself. This time, those invisible hands didn't hold me down. I grabbed my phone and left the room, locking the door behind me. It felt silly locking a door when I was alone, but I did it anyway. That night, I could barely sleep. I kept picturing the armchair squeaking in the dark or shifting position on its own. I kept my bedroom door closed. I woke up a few times, straining my ears, afraid I'd hear something. Morning finally came. I went straight to the office, not sure what to expect. The armchair was exactly where I'd left it. It was still turned toward the desk, looking as normal as ever, but I had a knot in my stomach just seeing it. I spent the day looking for logical answers. Could it be that I was just losing it? Or maybe there's some kind of mechanical issue with the chair. I tried sitting in a different chair that day to see if I'd notice anything. Nothing unusual. My desk chair didn't sigh or shift. Only that old armchair had the problem. I thought about my dad, wondering if he had ever mentioned anything about it. But I don't remember him saying a word about strange noises or feelings when sitting in it. All I remember is him telling me it was his favorite seat in the house because it let him relax after work. Now, each time I walk into my office, I feel this sense of unease. It's like the air is heavier near that chair. I catch myself glancing at it, almost expecting to see it move right in front of me. Sometimes I linger in the doorway, wanting to see if it'll shift while I'm watching. It never does. It seems to wait until I let my guard down or leave the room. I've tried to set up my phone to record video when I'm not in the office. I placed it on the bookshelf aimed at the armchair. I left it recording for a couple of hours and then came back to watch the footage. I didn't see the chair move. I didn't hear any sighs on the video, though the sound wasn't the greatest. As soon as I sat in it the next time, though, I heard another sigh. It's like it happens only when I'm there. I can't catch it on camera. I'm not sure what to do next. My logical mind says throw it out, but I can't bring myself to do that. It belonged to my father, and throwing it out feels wrong. Yet every time I sit in it, I get this eerie feeling. My heart rate goes up, and I start sweating. I keep picturing hands on my shoulders. Sometimes they feel comforting, like they're holding me gently. Other times they feel demanding, pinning me down so I can't move. I've reached the point where I limit my time in that chair. If I absolutely need to sit for a moment, I try to keep it short. The sighs still happen. I hear them and they send chills through my arms and legs. The chair sometimes vibrates or shifts a little under me. It's never enough to be obvious to an observer, but I feel it. Then when I get up, I sense this brief resistance. It's no longer surprising, it's just unsettling. That day it turned itself back to the desk from the wall made me realize there's more to this than random noises. I can't deny it anymore. Something about that chair reacts to my presence. Sometimes I wonder if it's my father in some strange way, but that thought freaks me out. I don't want to think about ghosts or spirits. I just know that I can't explain it with normal logic. I've tried flipping the chair around on different days. It keeps turning back when I'm not looking. I've never seen it move in real time, but I always find it facing the desk. I even tried wedging a small wooden block under one leg to see if that would prevent any movement. I left the office, came back an hour later, and the block was still there, but the chair had shifted somehow, ignoring the block. It left me feeling helpless. I also tried sitting in it and talking out loud. I felt stupid. I said things like, "Yo, if there's someone here, can you stop sighing?" I waited. Nothing. The second I stopped talking, I heard a faint exhale near my left ear. My face got hot. I jumped up. My pulse was racing, and I felt this cold tingling in my hands. I grabbed the sides of the armchair, pressing down hard, expecting it to move. It didn't. I walked out of the room and slammed the door. I don't have a perfect conclusion to this story. I'm just living with it day by day. The armchair remains in my office. I still hear sighs almost every time I sit in it. I still feel that moment of restraint when I try to stand up too quickly. And yes, it still moves on its own sometimes. I've learned to deal with it by minimizing contact, but I can't shake the feeling that there's something there. I don't know if it wants to hold me in place or make me share its existence in some way. All I know is if you ever come over, don't be surprised if I warn you before you sit in that old armchair. It's not normal, and I can't pretend otherwise. That's everything I've experienced up to now. I wish I had some big explanation, but I don't. I just know it's real, and it's part of my everyday life now. I'm telling this because I need to acknowledge it. Maybe one day I'll get rid of it, or maybe it'll just keep sighing until something else happens. Right now, I'm just hoping it never crosses a line I can't handle. That's all. I got home last night around 11. I was exhausted from a long day at work and just wanted to dump my bag in the living room and collapse on the couch. I remember stepping out of my car and looking around my driveway. It was quiet, and I noticed it was colder than usual. My front yard looked normal. The bushes were still and there was no wind. Then I walked around to the gate leading to my backyard. That's when I saw the lights. I froze for a second. From far away, they looked like fireflies hovering near the fence, but something felt off about them. They seemed bigger and brighter than any insect I'd ever seen. I noticed they moved at different speeds, not all together. Some hovered in place, while others glided across the yard as if checking every corner. My chest got tight, and I felt my stomach tense up. I had never seen lights behave that way. I thought it might be a reflection from some yard decoration or maybe a trick of my tired eyes. I stood by the gate and tried to focus. The lights were about the size of a tennis ball, though I couldn't measure them precisely. They made a low, crackling noise, kind of like static on a radio with the volume turned down. I leaned forward, trying to listen more carefully. The sound got louder when they moved, then faded when they stopped. There was no flicker on the ground around them. They didn't light anything except themselves. They were floating a few inches above the grass, and I couldn't see what was holding them up. I checked my phone to see if the flashlight might help. I unlocked the screen and pointed the phone's light toward the closest one. My hand was shaking a bit, so the beam was unsteady. The light didn't do much. It was like the floating orb just absorbed it. I couldn't see through it, and I couldn't see any reflection. It was just a dull glow hovering in midair. The static got a little louder and I pulled my phone back. My heart was pounding, and I realized my palms were sweaty. After a few seconds, I took a step back. My shoulders were stiff, and my legs felt tight. I was ready to run if I needed to, but nothing attacked me. The lights just continued to drift around. I counted maybe 6 or 7 of them in total. There might have been more. Some were on the other side of the yard near my old shed. One was close to the back door, just hanging there. I could see it from where I stood, and it looked like it was pointed at me, even though I couldn't make out any features. It reminded me of someone staring, except I saw no face. I felt a chill run across my back. I wanted to go inside, but I was worried about turning my back on those things. I decided to walk slowly toward the house, keeping my eyes on them. My key was in my hand and I held it tight. The one near the door didn't move as I approached. The static noise seemed to pulse. It got louder for a second, then dropped in volume. My ears started to ring and I felt a pressure in my head. It wasn't intense, but it was uncomfortable. I inhaled through my nose and tried to keep calm. When I reached the steps to the back door, I tried the knob. It was locked, so I slid the key in. My fingers fumbled and I had to take a moment to steady them. I got the door open and slipped inside. I turned on the kitchen light and looked out through the glass panes. The orb near the door was still there. I could see a faint outline around the glow, as if there was something hidden behind the brightness. It looked like a shape. Round edges, no hard angles, floating off the ground. It wasn't transparent, but it wasn't fully solid either. I locked the door and stood there, breathing hard. I listened for any movement inside the house, but everything was silent. I threw my bag on the kitchen table and kept my eyes on the backyard. The other lights were still floating around, but they didn't come closer to the house. The one by the door stayed in the same spot. I watched it for a couple of minutes. It made me feel uneasy, like I was being watched. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe these were some weird drone or experiment. But drones don't usually float like that, and they don't make that static sound in such a random pattern. My shoulders were tense and I couldn't relax. I checked all the doors and windows. I pulled down blinds and turned off the lights so I could see outside better. My heart rate finally slowed down a bit. I poured myself a glass of water and took a few gulps. My throat was dry, and my hands were still shaky. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't even know what to say. There are glowing orbs in my backyard. That sounded ridiculous, so I just stood by the window and watched. After a while, I realized I was too wound up to sleep. I decided to grab my phone and record. I wanted proof. I turned on the camera, pressed record, and aimed at the backyard through the glass. The phone captured some faint lights drifting around, but the footage looked blurry and the static noise was barely audible. I cursed under my breath. I figured I'd try a better angle. I opened the back door a crack and held out my phone. The static got louder and the orb near the door reacted by moving backward a foot or so. It was as if it noticed the phone. My heart picked up again, but I forced myself to keep the camera steady. I recorded for a minute, then shut the door. I played back the video. The orbs were there, but the details were poor. I could see them as white spots on the screen, and I could hear a soft crackle, but it wasn't anywhere near what I was hearing in person. My brow furrowed, and I felt a wave of frustration. I wanted a clear record of this. I tried to think of a better plan. I decided to step outside again, this time with the porch light off. I wanted to see them without the reflection of the glass. My breath was quick, and I felt my heart pounding again. I told myself to stay calm. I slowly turned the doorknob and stepped onto the concrete slab by the back door. The cold air hit my face and I shivered. I took a few steps into the yard, holding my phone out in front of me. The static crackling was louder now, like there was some sort of electric field in the air. My skin felt prickly. I kept the phone recording and I scanned around. The orbs drifted farther away from me, maintaining some distance. I noticed each one had its own slight variation in brightness. I also noticed they moved with a purpose. They didn't bump into each other and they seemed to avoid obstacles. When one got close to a tree, It moved around the trunk smoothly. My hand was clammy, and I could feel sweat on the back of my neck. Then I saw the orb from the door float toward me. It approached slowly, and I held my breath. It stopped maybe 6 feet away. I lifted the phone higher, trying to capture it. The orb flashed in a way that made me blink. It wasn't blinding, but it was a quick pulse of light. I heard a burst of static like a radio cutting in and out. My phone glitched, and the screen went black for a moment. I swore under my breath. Then the phone rebooted on its own. My heart was thudding, and I felt a tremor in my left hand. I wanted to bolt back inside, but I stayed put. My curiosity was stronger than my fear at that moment. The orb stayed there, as if it was waiting for me to do something. My mouth was dry and my breathing was shallow. Then it drifted to the right past me and joined the others. I stood there, stunned. My phone was still restarting. When it finally came back on, I realized the recording had stopped. I lost that footage. My stomach dropped and I cursed again. I didn't know what else to do, so I went back inside and locked the door. I checked the time. It was after midnight. I stood by the window in the dark, watching the orbs wander around the yard. They didn't seem aggressive, but they also didn't seem harmless. I felt uneasy. I turned on the kitchen light, made some coffee, and tried to process what was happening. The coffee tasted bitter, and I could barely swallow it because my throat was tight. I stayed up for another hour, and the lights remained in the yard. Occasionally, one would float closer to the house, but then it would drift back again. The static never went away. It had a faint hum that sometimes rose, then fell. My shoulders were so tense they ached. I rubbed the back of my neck, trying to ease the tightness. I thought about calling a friend or a neighbor, but it was late. I also worried about sounding crazy. So I just stood there, feeling the jitters in my stomach and the pounding in my chest. Eventually, I went to my bedroom and grabbed an old handheld radio. I wanted to see if the static noise would interfere with an actual signal. I turned it on, tuned to a random frequency, and kept the volume low. I approached the back window. As soon as I got near, the radio started picking up that crackle. It grew louder, blending with the station's music. I twisted the dial, but it was no use. The orbs were generating some kind of interference. My mind raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. At around 2 in the morning, I noticed the orbs seemed to be spreading out. One by one, they moved to different parts of the yard. 3 of them disappeared behind the shed. 2 others floated near the side fence, and I lost sight of them. The one nearest to the house hovered for a moment, then moved toward the fence line as well. It paused by the gate as if checking something, and then glided away. I kept my eyes on it until it vanished into the darkness. The static sound faded. After a few minutes, my yard was empty. My ears still rang, but the night felt calmer. I was drained. My muscles were sore, and my head was pounding with a dull ache. I stepped outside again carefully. The yard was dark, and I couldn't see any glow. I scanned every corner, shining my phone's flashlight around. Nothing. I realized I could hear normal sounds again. Distant traffic, the hum of my neighbor's air conditioner, a slight breeze through the trees. I let out a long exhale. My heart slowed down, and I tried to relax my shoulders. They were stiff from all the tension. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table. My mind was racing with questions. I wanted to know what those lights were and why they acted that way. I wanted to figure out how to document them if they ever showed up again. But I was too tired to think straight. I didn't feel safe, yet I couldn't stay up forever. I turned off the lights, made sure every door was locked, and headed to my bedroom. I lay in bed, fully clothed. My mind replayed the images of those glowing orbs floating through my yard. I felt a knot in my stomach, remembering how they moved, how they pulsed with that static. My heart rate refused to settle into a normal rhythm. My throat was scratchy, and my mouth was still dry. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening for any sign of them coming back, but it stayed quiet. I might have slept for a couple of hours. When I woke up, it was past dawn. I got up and went to the kitchen. My body felt heavy. I opened the curtains and looked outside. The sun was rising, and my backyard looked ordinary. I checked every part of it. There were no marks on the ground, No signs of anything unusual. I walked outside and touched the grass. It was damp with morning dew. No strange footprints, no burn marks, nothing. I felt frustrated and relieved at the same time. As I stood there, I thought about the orbs again. I remembered the static and that weird sense of being watched. I remembered the shape I saw behind the glow, like something was in there. It didn't feel like a dream or a hallucination. I felt the tightness in my chest again, just thinking about it. I walked around the yard, checking by the shed and the fence. I found no clues. Everything looked normal. I went back inside and replayed the short videos I managed to record. They were low quality. A person watching them might think it was just glare or some camera glitch. The main clip showed a faint white dot, drifting around with a little static noise. It didn't look half as strange as it did in real life. I felt a sinking feeling. I knew nobody would be convinced just by looking at that footage. I decided to keep my eyes open in the coming nights. I wrote down the time the lights appeared and tried to note the weather conditions. I wanted to see if there was any pattern. I also considered checking with neighbors to see if they noticed anything. But I didn't want to alert people without more information. The idea of telling them about floating lights that produced radio static seemed embarrassing. I took the day off from work because I was exhausted. I stayed home, glancing at the backyard every now and then. I didn't see anything unusual. I felt on edge, as if those orbs might pop up at any moment. In the afternoon, I tried to rest, but I kept thinking about how they looked. The way they drifted, how they stopped as soon as I got near, how one orb pulsed and messed with my phone. It all felt too real to ignore. That evening, I waited by the window once it got dark. My heart was pounding again as I stared into the yard, but nothing showed up. The static was gone. The night passed quietly. I went to bed around midnight and woke up at dawn. Still nothing. It's been a couple of days now, and I haven't seen them again. I keep checking my phone, half expecting it to glitch. So far, it's working fine. I still feel uneasy when I look at the spot near the back door where that orb hovered. My gut twists whenever I hear any faint crackling sound from the radio or any random static from another device. I can't shake the memory of those lights in my yard. They felt alive. I can't explain it in scientific terms, but they didn't act like anything I've seen before. The tension in my shoulders and the lingering tightness in my stomach remind me that my experience was real, at least to me. I'm not sure if they'll ever come back. I don't know what they were or what they wanted. All I know is that my quiet house and ordinary yard became the site of something I can't define. I'm not sleeping well because I keep picturing those hovering lights outside my window, crackling with that static, observing me from the darkness. For now, I'm just waiting to see if they return. If they do, I'll be ready to record again, and maybe this time I'll get clearer proof. Until then, I'm stuck with my memories and the uneasy feeling that I was being watched by something I still can't explain. I woke up yesterday feeling a dull ache in my lower back, and I remember rubbing that spot as I shuffled toward the kitchen. My house felt normal at first, quiet, a bit chilly from the early morning air, and I could still smell the faint trace of whatever I cooked the night before. Nothing seemed strange until I walked past the spare bedroom and stopped. There was a door in the hallway I had never seen before. It was on the left side, not far from the linen closet. That closet usually has a blank section of wall next to it. I've walked that stretch countless times, so I knew every inch. Yet there it was. A wooden door, no fancy designs, just dark brown wood with a faded knob. My heart started pounding in my chest. I felt a light sweat break out across my forehead. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if I'd ever seen any sign that a doorway existed in that spot. I hadn't. It was new, no question about it. I approached it slowly. I felt like my legs were heavier than usual, like I was wading through thick air. I raised my hand to the knob. It didn't turn at all. I gripped it harder, twisted to the right, then the left, but it wouldn't budge. It felt locked. I pressed my ear against the surface of the door and listened. I heard something faint, like a dragging sound or maybe just my own pulse. I couldn't place it. My own breathing felt loud, so I held it for a moment, trying to pick up any noise from inside. When I exhaled again, the sound I thought I heard was gone. I tried my shoulder against the door. I'm not a big guy, but I figured I could at least test if the door had any give. It felt solid, almost like pushing against a brick wall. I didn't hear it creak or shift. I rubbed my shoulder where it met the wood. It stung a bit, and I felt a strange vibration run through my arm, like the impact bounced back at me. Something about that door felt more dense than a normal door. I bent down to check the edges at the bottom, to see if there was any gap under the frame. The gap was so thin I could barely see the floor on the other side. I might have caught a glimpse of something dark, maybe a shadow, or just a patch of light that was dim. I tried again to twist the knob, giving it a few quick jerks. My palms were sweating. I didn't like the feeling of that door being there out of nowhere. It made no sense. Houses don't just sprout new doors overnight. When I let go of the knob, I thought I felt a pushback from the other side, like something shoved the door from inside to keep it closed. It wasn't strong, but it felt deliberate. My heart hammered even harder, and I stepped back. I wiped my palms on my pants and stared at the door for a long time. After I calmed myself a bit, I went to the garage and searched for a crowbar. I keep a lot of tools for minor home repairs, but I never had reason to bust open a mystery door. I found the crowbar behind a few paint cans, dusted it off, and headed back to the hallway. The door looked the same. No changes, no noises. I wedged the crowbar under the bottom edge, but the angle was too awkward. I tried to slip it between the door and the frame on the side, but that space was too tight. I ended up scratching the paint on the door frame. The wood was tough, and the crowbar kept bouncing off. Each time I tried to apply more force, I got that same weird sensation of resistance, like the door was pushing back. Eventually, my arms started to shake from the effort, and I gave up. I felt a dull throb in my biceps, and sweat was dripping down my face. I stepped away to catch my breath. I felt a little dizzy from all the tension. My mind was racing. I wondered if I was dreaming, or if I had some strange memory lapse that made me forget a renovation. But the house is old, and I've lived here for years. I know every single wall, every corner. There's never been a door in that spot, not once. I decided to call a friend of mine, Mark, who works as a contractor. I told him I had some weird issue with a door that wouldn't open. I didn't mention it appeared out of nowhere. I just said I needed help checking the hinges and possibly removing it. He said he could come by later, so I hung up and tried to occupy myself with other tasks. But I couldn't stop thinking about that door. I paced around the house, going from room to room, looking for any sign of structural changes. The living room looked the same. The ceiling vents in the kitchen looked fine. The spare bedroom was untouched. I returned to the hallway. The door was still there, locked tight. I tried pressing my ear against it again, but I heard nothing this time. I knocked gently. No response. I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I backed away, feeling unsettled. For the next few hours, I kept coming back to that hallway. I'd hover near the door, grab the knob, tug at it, then walk away. The tension in my chest grew each time. I felt a knot in my stomach, and my breathing got shallow. I'd wipe my hands on my shirt, then try again. Every attempt failed. The door wouldn't move or bend. It just stood there, solid and immovable. It felt like it was mocking me, taunting me with its presence. Mark texted me around midday saying he was stuck at another job and couldn't make it. I told him not to worry. I wasn't even sure I wanted someone else to see this thing yet. Part of me worried that if someone else confirmed it, that would make it more real, and I wasn't sure I could handle that. Eventually, night fell. I tried to relax by watching TV, but my eyes kept drifting to the dark hallway. I had left the hallway light on because I didn't like the idea of that door sitting in shadows. When I finally went to bed, I left the light on overnight. I slept restlessly, waking up a few times. Once, I thought I heard a soft thud. I listened carefully, but nothing followed. The house was silent. In the morning, I forced myself up, ignoring the heavy feeling in my head. My first thought was the door. I nearly tripped over my shoes in my rush to get to the hallway. When I got there, I froze. The door was gone. The wall was flat with the same old paint I remembered. No sign that a door had ever been there. I pressed my palms against the wall, searching for seams or hidden panels. Nothing. It was smooth. My fingertips traced the surface, and all I felt was cool plaster. My pulse raced. I knocked on the wall, hoping to hear a hollow sound that might reveal a secret space. It sounded solid. I knocked in a few places, even used my knuckles to feel for any difference. It all sounded the same. My mouth felt dry. I swallowed hard, trying to collect my thoughts. That door had been real. I had tried to pry it open with a crowbar, for God's sake. But there was no sign of damage. No scratch marks. No chipped paint. The wall looked just like it always had. I stood there for a long time, feeling that rush of disbelief and confusion. My skin prickled with goosebumps. My heart pounded, and I started pacing up and down the hallway, looking at every inch. Nothing looked out of place. The linen closet door was normal. The spare bedroom door was normal. Just that plain wall where the door had been. I grabbed my phone and opened my camera roll, hoping I had taken some photo or video the day before that showed the door. But I had nothing. I never thought to take a picture. I kicked myself for that. I felt anxious, thinking maybe I had hallucinated. But I remembered the physical sensations. I remembered how the knob felt, how solid the door was, how the crowbar kept slipping. That wasn't a dream. My shoulders still felt a bit sore from when I rammed into it. I pressed on it, felt the slight pain, and let out a shaky breath. That day I tried to go about my routine, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept drifting toward the hallway. Every few minutes I'd walk back over there, expecting the door to reappear. It never did. At lunchtime I barely ate. My appetite was gone. My stomach felt tense. I kept glancing over my shoulder as if I'd suddenly see the door behind me. I stayed jumpy all day. Later, I went into the basement to see if there might be a hidden space beneath that section of the house. I turned on the single overhead bulb, which cast a weak yellow light, and searched along the ceiling beams and the foundation walls. I checked the approximate area where that door would lead if it extended into a hidden room. I found no sign of any new construction or opening. The concrete was smooth and unbroken. I walked around, tapping on the walls with a flashlight handle. Everything sounded solid. My breath echoed in the basement, and I felt a chill that made me shiver. I hurried back upstairs. That night, I found myself standing in the hallway again, almost expecting something to shift. I turned off all the lights, then stood there in the dark for a few minutes, letting my eyes adjust. I wanted to see if the door might reveal itself if I looked at the wall differently. Nothing happened. The wall stayed a wall. Eventually, I turned the lights back on, my body tense, my heart beating faster than normal. I felt like a fool, staring at a blank wall. But I also felt like something was still there, hidden behind the plaster. The next morning, I decided to take measurements. I used a tape measure on the hallway length, then on the other side of that wall in the spare bedroom. The numbers didn't match exactly. There was a difference of a few inches that I couldn't explain by normal wall thickness. It was small, maybe a couple of inches, but it was there. I measured multiple times to be sure. It looked like there was a small gap in the layout that didn't match the blueprint I had on file. It wasn't enough to account for an entire hidden room, but it still bothered me. It suggested there might be a small cavity or empty space, but definitely not a normal-sized room. I pressed my ear against the wall in the spare bedroom, then the hallway, hoping to hear any sound from inside. I knocked with my knuckles in different spots. Every place sounded solid except for one section in the bedroom. It had a slightly hollow tone. Not by much, but enough that I noticed. I tapped it a few more times, trying to sense if it was just the difference in studs. My heart was racing. I thought about cutting through the wall to check, but that felt drastic. I also felt a slight fear that if I opened it, I might find something I couldn't handle. Over the next few days, the sense of unease settled into my routine. I'd do normal tasks, wash dishes, vacuum the living room, check emails, yet my mind kept drifting to the missing door. Sometimes I'd walk down the hallway expecting it to appear again. I touched that smooth stretch of wall often. It felt cold under my hand, and I got a shiver each time. At night, I barely slept. I kept waking up with this urge to get a sledgehammer and break through, but I never did. I was afraid of what might happen if I tore open the wall and found nothing, or, worse, found something I couldn't explain. I tried telling a couple of friends about it. I left out the part about the door just appearing overnight, though. I framed it like I suspected some hidden structural oddity in my house. They mostly laughed it off. One friend joked that maybe I had a secret safe stashed in the walls. Another said I should probably lay off the late-night horror movies. None of that made me feel better. I'd see their faces turn serious when I pressed them about hidden rooms or compartments. They didn't have any real answers. Sometimes I catch myself staring at that hallway, half hoping the door will come back just so I can prove it was real. Other times I hope it never does. My chest tightens when I remember the feeling of something pushing back from the other side. There was a presence there. I'm sure of it. Each time I recall that moment, the hair on my arm stands up. I feel a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, and my breathing quickens. I haven't left the house for more than a couple of hours since this started. I keep thinking if I leave for too long, something else might change. I check the walls every morning and every night. The more I look, the more certain I am that the door could appear again. And if it does, I'm not sure I'll be able to ignore it. I might finally smash it open, or I might run out of the house and never look back. That thought makes my stomach churn. My routine is a mess now. I barely eat. I forget simple tasks. I keep picking at the paint on the wall looking for the slightest crack. The paint is old, so sometimes little chips come off, revealing the layer beneath. The house is quiet most of the time, but at night I swear I hear faint bumps or taps. I'll freeze in my bed, my mind racing, waiting for the door to creak open somewhere in the darkness. When I gather enough nerve to check, the hallway is empty. This experience has changed how I feel about my home. I used to enjoy the silence here. Now it feels tense. Every shadow in the corner seems heavier. Every breeze through a crack in the window frame makes me jump. I keep expecting to see that dark brown wood in the corner of my eye. Sometimes I do see it for a split second, but then I blink and it's just the blank wall. My heart will still pound from the shock. I don't know if this door will show up again. The only thing I'm sure of is that it was real for a day. I touched it, heard it, felt it resisting me. The next day it vanished without a trace. Now I measure the walls and search for differences, but the house stays the same. Yet I can't shake the feeling that there's a room I can't reach. Something on the other side that doesn't want me inside. And every time I walk down that hallway, I remember the feeling of that locked knob in my hand, the pressure of something pushing back, and the sudden emptiness that followed the next day. That memory won't leave me. It sticks in my mind as clear and solid as that door was. So that's my story. I'm still here, living in this house, waiting. I've gotten used to the idea that something beyond my understanding happened. I keep a crowbar in the hallway closet now just in case I need it. I don't know if I'll ever use it. Part of me wants to tear down every inch of that wall just to make sure there's nothing behind it. But another part of me is glad I haven't done that. Because if I did find a hidden space, I'm scared of what I might see inside. Right now it's just an uneasy feeling, a possibility. That's bad enough. I still wake up every morning and check. The wall remains smooth and solid. No knob, no frame, no sign of anything. But the feeling that it's there, somewhere, never goes away. I can't prove it to anyone else. I have no evidence. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And that's why I keep looking even when I'd rather stop thinking about it. Because if it appears again, I want to be ready. Maybe next time I'll manage to get inside and see what's there. Or maybe I'll just stand and stare, too afraid to go in. Either way, I can't rest until I find out.